Hey, what's up, people? Before we get started on season 3, I just needed to say thank you for the love and support you have shown over the past 2 years with the first 2 seasons. It has been incredible seeing the love and response I get from you on the internet, when I'm walking around the town, all the local people that have helped me get my podcast to this first level. I will never be able to say thank you enough for all of it. But now we get to go on good stuff. Thank you for being patient with the new name and the new logo, but Refuse to Fail is officially here. Same quality podcast guests, same incredible stories, new name and a new logo that looks a bit nicer. That is the only change. So season 3 gets underway with this episode because I knew the second I finished recording it, it was too good not to put at the front. I wanted everybody to hear it as soon as possible. Today I am joined by reigning triple world champion, European champion, Paralympic gold medalist, Paralympian swimmer extraordinaire, Tully Kearney, MBE. She has had some ups and downs in her career and she has done it all with a smile on her face and she's never let it defeat her. And these next couple of hours are really going to show you how incredible this person truly is. She is nothing short of extraordinary. So I don't want to hold this up any longer. Refuse to Fail, season 3, episode 1 with Tully Kearney, MBE is a go. Let's play this brand new intro that I worked up. I'm looking forward to this, and I had to start off with a banger, so I chose the biggest and best I could get. I have got Tokyo 2020 gold and silver medalist, reigning triple world champion, European champion ×2. She just is a proper inspiration. 13 gold medals, 7 silver, 5 bronze. The list goes on and on and on. Tully Kearney, MBE, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I'm all right, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. Sunday night, we're sitting having a chat. It doesn't get much better than that. I've cut red onions, so it looks like I've been crying for 20 minutes, but we've been discussing that off camera, and that's how the trick is. See, I talked to all these amazing people, so now I'm meal prep. So now I'm sat here chopping onions before we start a podcast, trying to get healthy, and it's backfiring. But enough about me. We're here to talk about you. What have you been up to this week? How's life in the Tully Kearney household?
Yeah, it's all right. This week was my first week back to training post concussions. It's been pretty rough.
Oh no.
Not the greatest week, but hopefully we'll get there.
Oh no. How did you get a concussion?
Kind of a funny story. I went out for dinner with a friend, and we're both wheelchair users. And like being in the city centre of Manchester, it's kind of crazy to park. So we're like, oh, we'll just take one car. So he like came and picked me up when we parked in the city centre. And I've been out like in his car multiple times, and I use a power assist on my wheelchair. So
Okay.
I was sat in the boot of his car to put the power assist on my chair, and I've done it hundreds of times in his car. And for some reason, this one time he forgot I was there, and he closed the boot on my head.
I'm sorry, I really should laugh, but when you started off this way, that's not how I expected it to end. I thought there was going to be some traumatic night out story, and your friend just accidentally dropped the boot on you.
Yeah.
Oh, he must have felt really guilty. I'd feel traumatized if Tully Kearney was in the boot of my car. I hit her with the boot. I don't even know what I'd do. I definitely wouldn't be recording the podcast. I'd be hiding from the public, that's for sure.
Yeah, he has been very sorry. He's been like phoning me every day to make sure I'm alright. Yeah. I definitely won't be sitting in anyone's car boot anytime soon.
No, that's a travesty. The poor guy. I can understand his worry. I'd be sending a lot of "I'm sorry" texts. Oh, this is how this podcast is going to go. I'm loving because I was never expecting a story like that when we started today, so that's great. But before we get into the life and story of Tully Kearney, my lovely listeners need to learn a bit more about you. So what we do for that is we have a little section called the quick fires, and this is literally just a yes or no, this or that. Really straightforward. So for example, the first one is always cup of tea or a cup of coffee.
Okay. Tea.
Tea? Strong. You're the first one. I think everybody else I spoke to seems to be running on fumes. You must have it together because everybody else is drinking coffee, trying to stay awake. So you must have your stuff together.
I think swimmers are just kind of a different breed where we don't need coffee to get through.
You're sick of fluids. You're like, I spend my whole life in water. I just want rid of it. Okay, right. A night out or a night in? Which one are you more likely to go for?
Night in.
I love that. Question following that: if you're to sit there and watch the telly on a night in, are you a series or a movies kind of person?
Ooh. Depends on what mood. I'd probably say more likely series.
I love that. I've been getting into The Boys recently. If you've not watched that, you should get involved. It's pretty. You've not watched it?
No.
Oh, special, incredibly violent, but really, really funny. Right, if you had to get rid of one tomorrow, so it could not exist in the world, would you get rid of sport or dogs?
Oh no, that's oh no, that's a horrible question. I've literally got like my dog's face before he died on my t-shirt. Like you can't ask me that. Uh,
We'll give it an indecisive. We'll give it
can it be a certain sport? Does it have to be all sport?
swimming.
No, oh no, that's horrible.
You can't pick a sport you don't play. That'd be easy.
Uh, I don't want to get rid of dogs, but I can't get rid of my sport.
We'll go with neither. You'll have to keep both. I'll let you off because you gave the concussion story, so you get your one free pass. Okay, if you're in the car and you're trying to get to somewhere, are you more likely to listen to the playlist or the radio?
Radio.
Oh, I like that. I'm the first radio listener in a while. I'm a big radio fan. Right. Socks and sliders, are they socially acceptable? Yes or
No.
no? No, not a fan. Right. If we're trying to get something organized, are you more likely to text the group or are you the one that gets the FaceTime on the go and says, let's get this organized?
Text.
Love that. Sweet or salted popcorn in the movies?
Sorted.
Nice. Twitter or Instagram if you had to get rid of one tomorrow?
I'd get rid of Twitter.
Lovely. If you could be in one universe, would you rather be in the Star Wars universe or the Lord of the Rings universe?
Got to be honest, I've not watched either.
Tully. There's been a few, so I can't spoil it because you're the first episode of the season, but there's a few that haven't seen them either. So some bonus content, I'm gonna have to get the group together and we're gonna have a watch along and we can review. Because I'm telling you, you're missing out. Okay, we'll try this one. What's your go-to Disney movie?
Uh, 101 Dalmatians, I guess. That's
It's
Disney.
great. It's a great film. Great film. Do you have a favorite quote that you like to live by?
This has kind of changed over the years.
Okay.
Because I used to really like if I don't try hard today, someone else will. However, that doesn't really work with my life anymore. So I quite like if you can see it, you can be it. That's kind of the one that I'm
I
angling
like
towards.
that. I like both of them. You could keep both of them, but I like the new one. That's the good one. If you can see it, you can be it. That's very inspirational as well. That was that the motto for the Paralympics a few years ago? No.
Probably.
Was that one of the taglines they used? I can't remember. Well, either way, I like it. I think it's really good, and I do think it is a great point. I think there's a lot of situations where that is true. Smashed it. Right. What is your go-to fast food if you're having just like a nice lazy day? You know, I don't want to cook. What's your favorite go-to takeaway fast food place?
Um, Probably say Indian. There's like I'm quite restricted because I can't eat onion or garlic or
Oh
lactose.
no.
So, but there's one place that we know like back in Birmingham that's local, and they actually make me a curry without onion or garlic. So it's amazing.
I love that. I love that. You Birmingham originally?
Um, so I was born in Nottingham, and then we moved around a lot because my dad was in the army. But we
Fair.
settled in Birmingham when I was about 7.
All right.
So
Oh,
like my whole career was starting in Birmingham.
class. I'm Solihull, so I'm familiar with that neck of the
Alright.
woods, and I can appreciate the fact you like a good curry from there because there's a lot of good curry in that area.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, there you go. That's quick fire. True quick fire is done now. We just need to do the one, which is one of the questions I gave you a bit of time for. What is your favorite piece of memorabilia you've managed to collect on your sporting journey so far?
So this was kind of a hard one because stuff I got from Tokyo is obviously quite meaningful, but actually
Mhm.
one of my favorite things was I went to the World School Games in Sao Paulo in 2014, and we swapped kit. So I actually have a Brazilian team, like it's kind of like a tracksuit top, like a zip top, and
That's cool.
that's probably my favorite because it's just really cool.
I like that because they're not things you can go out and buy either. Like football
Yeah,
kits, you can kind of go and buy new one, but like Brazilian swimming kit, that's pretty unique.
yeah.
I love that.
And
That's really
it
good.
changes every year as well. So every year the patterns and the
Mhm.
brands sometimes are different. So it's like it's quite unique to that one year.
That's cool. I love it when people talk to us about swapping kits. Swapping kits must be the best part of being a professional athlete.
Yeah.
Do you now do that now as well? Do you like try like run around at like the in the call room and you run around like, does anybody want to swap kit?
Not in the
I need
chorus.
some memories.
Usually, like, at the end, but the issue is, like, as the years have gone on, we get less and less kit, we get less race suits, less caps, so people are less like, are more reluctant to wanna change because if they rip a cap like, so
Mhm.
the biggest thing about making a big swim team is getting your name on your swimming hat, and
Right.
if you only get 3 of them and, like, they do rip so, like, you rip one and you've already given 1 or 2 away, then, like, that's why people are like, "Oh, well, I don't really wanna give one because we only got 2 or 3 this year." So it is harder now.
That's tough. So what you're saying is we need to find a way to make sure that you guys get more kits so you can do a bit more collection swapping.
Yeah.
Right. So if there's one thing the higher ups take away from this, we're needing at least 7 or 8 swim caps per meet. That's what I'm learning here.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, it's got the vote of approval. You're not going to argue with MBE, are you? I'm not doing it. Right. Speaking of that, I'm looking forward to this answer now. Then, what's a piece of memorabilia you want to add to your collection?
Uh, I think one thing that would be quite cool, is that I know that some of the other swimmers have had, they've had, like, rings or necklaces made with, like, the Paralympic logo. So I think after Paris, that'd be quite a cool thing to add. I don't know if that counts as memorabilia, but
Yeah, I think so. You're getting it made in a sporting occasion. That counts.
yeah.
Plus, it'll be something you can wear all the time as well. If it's a ring or a necklace, like, it'll be something you don't have to take off all the time. So that'll be good.
Yeah.
I love that. A ring to commemorate Paris. We'll go there, or necklace, but we'll go with it. There we are. Memorabilia is quick fires, done and dusted. Nothing too strange there. Nobody's going to call you out and say, "Why are you getting rid of dogs? You're a sociopath. You've kept both. You've played the field very well." But that's it. So now we get to talk into the good bit. We get to talk about you and your story coming up. And now, how does swimming find you? So actually, before we talk about that, so please correct me if I'm wrong here. Want to make sure I get this worded the right way because it's so important to the. I don't like using the words that sometimes go a bit different. So you were born with cerebral palsy. I'm
Yeah.
correct. So can you just give a quick definition of what cerebral palsy is for my listeners here that may not be aware of this condition?
So cerebral palsy is basically a brain injury from lack of oxygen that occurs shortly before, during labour, or shortly after, within the first year after birth. Um, Obviously, because it's a brain injury, depending on where in the brain's damaged, how severe it is, cerebral palsy is a massive spectrum. So
Okay.
there are different types of cerebral palsy, and also everyone's affected completely differently. So for me, I have spastic diplegia, which basically means I have very tight muscles in my lower body, and I have weakness on my left side. So I've always struggled with like walking, running, jumping, things that need you to be able to control your muscles, basically.
Okay. Okay. So then that came through there. So while you said you were born with that in the first couple of years. So did that affect your affinity for sport? Did you find swimming quite early on, or when was it you were first introduced to the prospect of swimming?
So I've got an older brother, and I
Hmm.
always wanted to keep up with him. I was always that annoying little sister that just followed him everywhere. And he did athletics and football and like always been really active, but I just physically couldn't do it. And he was part of the swimming club,
Okay.
and I used to spend like most of my evenings on poolside just watching him. And when we moved to Birmingham, he joined Walsall Swim Club, and the after about a year, the coach approached me when I was around 8 and said, like, "Do you want to join in?" And at first, like, my mum has always been very overprotective and very nervous about allowing me to do things, and she was like, "Oh, I'm not really sure," like, and I think she didn't want me to try it and then feel defeated that I couldn't do it. But for me, like, she let me go and try, and I just kind of fell in love with it. Like, in the water, I didn't feel disabled. I can move around freely. I didn't need help. No one stared at me. I wasn't, like, treated like the disabled kid. I just fit in with everyone else, and it was
Okay.
really nice to be able to keep up with, like, kids my own age and just be part of a group where everyone is treated the exact same and no one's, like, the disabled kid.
Hmm. I love it. That's really so how did that change to keeping you like you said you then felt like part of the group? Was that just because the muscle sort of didn't play that much of a role as it did in an athletic, like a track and field athletics type thing? Or
Yeah, I think, like, because it's not weight bearing, it was much
Mhm.
easier. And I think I've just obviously, like, my mum was a swimmer. She was national champion in breaststroke, and I think that's obviously helped. My brother was a swimmer, and I think I was very lucky that I just have that natural ability to be able to hold my position in water.
Mhm.
And for me, it kind of became my escape that if I was frustrated about my disability or something had happened and I was like someone bullied me or, was mean about my impairment, that I'd get in the
Yeah.
water and all my worries would just disappear.
Oh, I love that. Did you get like a nice little bit of satisfaction if you did have one of these unfortunate situations where another kid might give you a bit of grief, where you then just like, okay, 3 lengths in the pool, I'll smoke you, and then like
Yeah.
take your insults and turn around and go.
Yeah, I actually like, especially at, like in school at PE, like I
Mhm.
absolutely hated it because I just couldn't do anything. So the only thing I could do was swimming, and that was the one thing that I could get in and just go so much quicker than everyone else, and everyone was just shocked. And I was like, yeah,
I
that was
love
just
it.
like one thing that I loved.
I love it. I also think that would be the most badass response ever if somebody started giving you a bit of grief and you replied with, "Let's see who the quicker racer is in the pool." There, I'd be like, "This woman's either gonna smoke me at swimming or she's gonna drown me. So either way, I'm I'm losing here." But that's a really badass response, and I love that attitude from you to have that from such a young age as well. That's a really mature thing you've
Mm.
had to grow up with as well. You mentioned I was going to talk about this later because I did know your mum was a national swimmer actually, but I think this fits in quite nicely, and it's sort of like we're talking about the family dynamic you have there. Now that you are this incredible champion with more medals than I've possibly had hot dinners, how does your mum ever still give you advice? And your mum like, is there still that debate? Your mum's like, well, I was national champion, and you're like, Mum, have you seen the mantelpiece? Like, does she ever try to give you like tips and tricks? And you're like, I think I've got
Yes,
this, Mum. I'm all right.
all the time. And it's so infuriating, and she's like, "Oh, maybe you should ask about this. Maybe you should do this." And I'm like, "Mum, I know what I'm doing. It's all right."
Mum, I don't know if you saw my highlights on YouTube, but there was like comfortable seconds between me and the next place. So 'cause I was watching your highlights when I was doing research for this. Obviously, we were meant to for the listeners, we were meant to discuss this the other week, but obviously Tully's injury caused a bit of a setback. So I'm not going to make anybody hear my draining voice with a concussion. So I'll give her a week to recover. But your highlights, I can like listeners, if you want to learn more about Tully, go and watch her highlights. She is aquatic at this point. Like you are lightning through the water. It is terrifying. I reckon you could probably swim faster than I could run. Like that's how impressed I was watching this in a non-condescending way. It was magnificent to watch. So you talk about the family. Your brother obviously said you were following your brother around for that. How did then the swimming come into Tully Kearney, the person? We've said how it was a bit of a relief and it made you feel not like you were part of a different sort of categorization. You were one of everybody else and stuff like that. So then, did that then become part of the swim club? And how did the swim club help you branch out as well? When did you start competing at swimming? It was at a young age, or was it just as you grew up?
Yeah, so in swimming, I think the rules have changed a bit now, but back then, this was obviously many years ago, when you were 8, you could do, like the arena leagues, which is it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like a team competition. So you go for the team, and every race scores points for the team. So it's like it's
Okay,
not individual. It's like for everyone, and then if your team wins, you can move on to the next round, until you get to the finals. Um, so when you were 8, you could do that. So like my first few races were just like like tiny little 25-meter pools that were like 4 lanes with all these clubs. Um, and and then when you're 9 was when you could actually do an individual race. So
okay.
my first race was actually at Ponds Forge in Sheffield, which is like my favourite pool.
Shout out.
And, I'd spent a few years watching my brother race there.
Right.
Um, and it was actually quite interesting because he was supposed to be racing with me, but the week before he broke his ankle. So, like, as a kid growing up the street, there used to be a cake shop. So, like, when he was racing between his races, I would walk with my dad up to the cake shop and get cakes while he was racing. I remember, like, this time being really annoyed because he got to go and get cakes at the cake shop and I had to race.
I love that. You're the only thing you're focused on is like the jammy dodger, and everyone's like, "Tully, you're really good at swimming. Keep swimming." And you're like, "But I do want to go for a cake."
And I think, like, at that age, I wasn't really bothered about racing. It was more like I just really enjoyed swimming and training, whereas I hadn't really got the concept of, like, racing against other people because I just didn't really care.
Okay, I understand that. Yeah, it takes a while to find that competitive sort of mindset to something,
Mm,
especially because I don't know what it was like where you're growing up in terms of sports available. So where I'm from, it's very much the boys play rugby and the girls play hockey. Everything else is like a PE subject. It's kind of a bit of fun. It's something you do at school. There's not really competitiveness to it. But ironically, I think we've never had somebody from Scotland play, or we've never had somebody from our town represent Scotland at hockey or rugby. So it shows how well we do in our competitive edge, but that's a story for another day. But so when did that sort of competitiveness start to hit you as this swimming can take me somewhere? Was that when you started doing these individual races at 9 years old, or did it come a bit older when I'm actually in a competition now?
No, it actually took quite a long time, because even like, well, up to like when I was 11, 12, I actually was pretty terrible. Like I wasn't good at swimming at all. And I think I was just still trying to figure out, like with cerebral palsy, it's really hard to plan a movement. So like, like for example, like that, oh, I've got to move my arm in this certain way to get a swimming stroke, but actually being able to plan it in your brain of how exactly it needs to move is really difficult. And for me, like if I can't see where my arms are, I have no idea what they're doing. So it took me quite a few years to learn certain things like tumble turns. And I was talking to my mum about this the other day, because I don't think it'd be allowed now. But the only way that I learned to turn is that the coach was in the water with me and literally forced my head underwater and pulled my body into a turn position multiple times until my body learned what it is to be in that position, how to get into it.
Okay.
And I don't think I'd have learned otherwise. But yeah, and I don't think nowadays you'd be able to physically manhandle a kid to get them to tumble turn.
You say that, but at the same time, it's like it's a way you could look at that. You look at that as really good coaching of understanding your athlete, of going, I know that she has cerebral palsy. I know that this affects her. I suppose the brain wave to the muscle, because like you said, you need to see your arm to physically feel like you're in control of it. But then, like you said, yeah, convincing somebody that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing when you jump into a pool with a 9-year-old and start dunking them is probably a tough sale.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, if we ever struggle, we'll just go through your medal history, and then that might save the coach a bit of trouble. It'd be like, it works. There's case in point, it works now. I love hearing these stories, and then especially when you talk about cerebral palsy and how it affects your arms. So was that something you really had to then learn as like a muscle memory point? Because like you say, it affects I'm trying to make sure I do your words justice of how to explain this, so I'm not misrepresenting it. But you have that thought of, it's kind of so like a person like myself, I just think I want to pick up, for example, this glass of water here. I don't really have to think about it. I just kind of do it. Mm-hmm. Do you have to do a sort of like forced effort for that, as in I want to pick up that and I need to think about doing it? Or?
Yeah, I do. It's not as bad on my right side, but especially my left side. It's kind of like the messages from the brain get kind of mixed up. They don't fully, they get there, but they get there a bit slower, and it's not the full message. So the movement isn't as good, so it's a bit shaky or like not quite coordinated.
It's so I love hearing when people come through these sort of adversities and really hone their skill. And then, like I say, you're now, well, I counted at least 25 medals in the first 20 minutes of doing the research for you. So I kind of stopped after that. I thought I'm going to run out of pages, and like, this is a thick notebook. And then obviously, like, there's a lot of, I ran out of pages for the notes, but there we go. Yes, the swimming came through you. Let's talk about age 14, because that was your first international competition in 2011. Mm-hmm. That was Berlin, I believe.
Yeah, so that was only about a year after getting classified for the first time. So I went for classification at 13, because like at first we kind of knew of parasport and paraswimming, but I didn't know if I was eligible for it, and I didn't know how to get into it. And then we learned that generally, like, each area has like a disability squad. So West Midlands had one that met once a month, so I started going to them, and then I was able to get classified. And then it was kind of crazy. At my first competition after getting classified, I was approached by it was a British swimming coach at the time, who's now actually our head coach. I've known him all these years. And he kind of approached me, and I got put on the talent program. And then I think this is the only time they've ever done that, is that year they had an athlete on podium potential. So there's like 3 tiers. It's called something different now, but back then it was the bottom tier was talent, and then it was podium potential and podium. So I was put on the talent program, and there was an athlete on the podium potential program, and they decided to move mid-year, like mid-season, which is never heard of, move him up to podium. So they moved me from talent into his spot on podium potential, which meant that I was then selected for the German Open in Berlin.
Oh, wow. So these 3 titles that you say they've now changed now, is that sort of, does that dictate how much attention you sort of get as well, in terms of where we want to send you and how we want to sort of marshal you. Because I imagine a head coach or this British swim coach you had that's now head coach has a lot of sort of people he needs to sort of kind of profile, I suppose, is probably the best way to say about that. So
What was talent is like a para academy now, and it's generally like the under 18s, like the younger ones, trying to get them into it and trying to so for the ones at the minute in the para academy, they're not really focused on Paris, they're focused on LA. So they're not focused on the next games, they're the ones after, because they're quite young and they need they still need a lot of work and a lot of skills and learning how to be at international events and like all the nutrition stuff and everything they need to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so interesting. I love hearing about how I've been saying I love hearing about this. I think that shows my excitement for this because I love it when I get a topic. I love it when I get a topic of something I know relatively little about. Because one, I get to ask really silly questions and I'll be like, so swimming, what is that? And then, but it's so interesting hearing about how all these behind the scenes things come about. And like you say, you get chucked in these programs. So how did it feel when you got put onto Podium Potential? Because I assume how did they sort of not sell it to you, but how did they explain it to you when they took you in and said, we've seen your classification, we've seen how you swim, we believe there's talent here. This is the project we want to put you on, and then moving you up. How did that call go?
To be honest, it's so long I can't remember, but I think we got a phone call and then an email. But I was just really excited, like getting to go to Berlin. I was just super excited, like the first time like away from my family, like on my own, getting to race in a foreign country. And then I turned up at Berlin and surprise, surprise, my mum had flown without telling me she was in Berlin to watch me. And I was like, Mum, this is like my first thing where I'm like on my own and you've turned up to Berlin.
That's good support. You can't hold at your mum for flying to Berlin.
No, that's true. But I was like, like I was one of the youngest. There was a 13-year-old and then me who just turned 14 like the week before. Mm-hmm. And we were like the youngest on the team. So I was like, trying to act cool and like not be the young kid that's got their mum with them.
Was your mum? So did your mum join? I think your mum was just there as a spectator. Like she wasn't.
Yeah, like they're not allowed. Like they're not allowed in the same flights. They're not allowed in the same hotel. So they're not really allowed to come and see you. So the way that the pool's really cool in Berlin. It's actually one of my favourites. Sheffield's always gonna be my absolute favourite at Ponds Forge.
Sheffield's home, but Berlin's a favourite. Yeah.
But Berlin's like a really nice pool, and the way that like the upstairs is that all the swimmers are on one side and all the spectators on one side in the stands, but you can walk like across. So I could just go over and see her, but I didn't like. So I could see her, but I just chose to stay with the team.
Played it cool, yeah. Played it cool. You're young and with your friends, like you're on a holiday, like a very serious one, but you're on a holiday. So
I think like that was back then. I didn't really realize how serious it was. Like I didn't think of it. Like I know over the years, a lot of people have been like, well, this is your job, you get paid for it. And that's quite a hard thing to concept, especially at 14, that you're paid to be an athlete, like this professional, supposedly professional athlete, but you're still a kid. And that was kind of difficult for me. And at that point, like obviously I loved it, like getting the kit, that was my first time getting like actual race suits, because they're more expensive now, but even then I think they were £200. So like we were never going to buy them because I didn't need them. But obviously when you race internationally, you're expected to, they're supplied for you. So it was the first time getting like proper fast skin racing suits and like a hat with my name on and all this. Like, so obviously it was really exciting, but it hadn't really sunk in like how big this actually was.
Mm-hmm. You said there that you were getting paid. So was this, I think you're on the GB Paralympic sort of athlete program then at this point. Yeah.
The one like the talent program, like that was when I was on Podium Potential actually. So they've got different tiers, and I think I don't know if the Para Academy is still the same, but before when it was talent, it was like £500 a year. So it was just to pay for like 1 or 2 costumes or like bags and goggles and stuff like that. Okay. And then when you're on Podium goes from, it's kind of changed over the years, but I think at the minute there's A plus down to C, and then it should be I think D to like F on Podium Potential. So basically, when you're in that program, there's not only that one program that like classifies you, but it's also there's a classification system on how much you actually earn. So how much you get depending on how quick you are. So it's generally based off world rankings. Like it might be world number 1 plus a certain percent will get you into whatever category. But like for A plus, you have to be like the gold medalist that season. So like if you like, for example, for me, like when I went to Worlds and won, that means you're on the highest level of funding. If you get silver, you might be on B. If you get a bronze, you might be on C. So it does change kind of every year sometimes, but basically how well you perform and what ranking in the world is depends on how much money you get funding wise from Lottery Fund.
Okay, so it's a performance based aspect type thing.
Yeah.
And then
So
like you say, when you were there at 14, although you were technically getting money, it's not like you're not getting a living wage type thing. You're getting
not at that point,
sort
no.
of like, yeah, you're getting like your expenses covered almost to an extent.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
almost enough to cover stuff that your parents would usually be forking out for.
God bless the bank of mum and dad. That's
Yeah.
one consistent thing I've noticed with every podcast. Bank of mum and dad has had to get used to buy some
Oh, yeah.
kit.
Especially like I know for a long time my brother was quite envious, and he still says that I'm the favourite child. Like one being disabled and two being the younger one meant that
There's no way your brother plays the disabled card on you.
he does all the time. And but like I do need more support than him, and
Yeah.
because when we got to the age where we were at different clubs and he started playing water polo and we had to be at different pools, like I was on the outskirts of Birmingham, he was like the other side of Birmingham, and my mum was like, I can't be in two places at once. So he would have to get lifts for people or get the train or get the bus. And he got really annoyed about that he had to become really independent and do a lot of stuff on his own because my mum was with me like almost 24 hours a day. Like she would take me to morning training and we get back at like 7:30. She'd then go to work all day, get home, have a quick dinner, and then we'd go to the pool and we'd be back at like 10 p.m. and then repeat it again.
Yeah.
So then being a single parent, like my brother didn't really get much attention. So he definitely did hold it against me quite a lot.
No.
And obviously it was a lot for him to give up. But again, like my mum, I mean, he got stuff he needed like for his sports that he did. But I think because I needed a bit more and more attention and support, I think for him it seemed like I got a lot more attention and more items and more things.
Yeah, it must be tough as like a kid as well because like you don't get the understanding you sort of get as you grow up type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want everything to be like a level playing field. So
Yeah.
poor guy, bless him. But yeah, I can understand having to get the bus to the other side of Birmingham and you're like, oh, just once I just like a lift and I could have an extra 20 minutes in bed or something.
Yeah, my brother's very late. That's why he didn't commit to swimming and water polo. Like he was a very good swimmer and an excellent water polo player, but he's just not like me. Like he really wants to achieve the results and he wants to play. He just doesn't want to train. He doesn't want to put in the effort, and he admits to that he's lazy. He doesn't want to put in the effort, and he was never going to make it because he just refused to train.
Poor guy. I know how it feels. To be fair, there's many a day I've woken up on a Monday morning and thought I'll just stay in bed today. So I relate to him probably more than I relate to you in terms of commitment and dedication. So I'm on the brother's side here. Not pulling out the disabled card on you. That one he's firmly in his own bracket there. But other than that. Oh, I'm having so much fun. This is amazing. So we've now explained the whole process of the podium potential, talent, the GB sort of ranking system getting classified. How was that process of getting classified though? Actually, like how does that go about? Is it just somebody sort of watches you race, or do you have to sort of like explain your disabilities at the time?
So it's quite a long process. So you have to get like before you even apply, you have to get medical evidence. So like your specialist consultants, physios, like and also have all the proof. So like MRI, if you've got cerebral palsy, it's brain injury, so MRI scans.
Yeah.
More recently, they've made me have a modified Ashworth scale test, which is kind of like it tests the spasticity.
Okay.
But since I was around 13, 14, which we can come on to later, I also have a different condition, dystonia. And the modified Ashworth scale isn't accurate if you've got cerebral palsy and dystonia because basically the spasticity is muscle tightness, but the dystonia can mask muscle tightness because it's a movement disorder, so it can stop movement and cause contractures, but it's not spasticity. So when you do a modified Ashworth scale test on someone that has dystonia and spasticity, it's really hard to tell if the lack of movement is from dystonia or spasticity.
Okay.
Not the most accurate test, but for some reason they still like it. But so after you've got all your medical stuff, you then get given a date if you're lucky. Obviously, like when it comes up to big meets, for someone like me who's not on a fixed review, because my dystonia is progressive, I don't get a fixed date. I usually like every 2 to 3 years I have to be reviewed again to make sure I've not got worse. So for someone at my level, I'm obviously prioritised. So British Swimming get a certain number of slots per competition, and they obviously pick who's in who they want to be done. So someone like an international level swimmer like myself will be done over someone that they're trying to get up into being an international swimmer. So they'll
Mhm.
like prioritize medalists over people that, are just coming into it.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
of course, they need to keep you guys in the pool, really, don't they? And that can
yeah,
delay that. Yeah.
yeah, and they can't risk, like, if we're not classified and our classification's up for review and it runs out, we can't race. So we have
Yeah.
to be done that year. And obviously you don't want to be done at a world championships or a European or a major meet because it's just a massive stress. That's not ideal. And things can go wrong, like, you just never know with classification. So on the actual day, it's a bench test, so it depends what disability you've got. So for someone with short stature or with an amputee, they measure either your height or the side that you're a limb amputee on,
Okay.
and that will depend what classification you're in, how long the stump is and how much function you've got will depend on obviously what classification you're in. But for someone with cerebral palsy, it's like coordination function test. So active and passive movements, like how well do your joints move and how well can you move them? And after that, so they score every joint 1 to 5. 5 is complete normal movement and 0 is no movement. Sorry, yeah,
Okay.
0 to 5. And so they score like every joint, and then you go in the water and they do a water test. So usually it's at least 100 meters of each stroke. They get you to float to see if you can hold your body position still in the water on your front and your back. Sometimes they get you to do skull. Like if you can use your legs, they get you to leg kick,
Mhm.
dive. Like literally looking at all the skills, and then they get you to do a bit quicker stuff to see what happens to your stroke when you're going at a quicker pace. Does it break down? Does it look better? Does it look worse? And then obviously like your dive starts and what you would usually do, tumble turns, like literally looking at every part of your stroke.
Wow.
And then they come up with a score. So you've scored on the bench test and you've scored on the water test, and basically the number puts you into your category. So like for physical
Mhm.
impairments, you've got S1 to S10. S1 being really severely disabled, S10 being very mild. So if you're an S10, you'd have a very mild impairment. You'd be at a very slight disadvantage to an able-bodied swimmer. So you might be a foot amputee, or you might be missing your hand, like, or have a club foot, something that's like quite minor.
Okay,
Um,
so that's like the close of where if there was somebody you're to sort of not maybe see it right away, if that makes sense,
yeah,
that's probably where they'd more likely be in the Paralympics type thing or at a meet
yeah.
in
If
that
they have a
S10
physical
range. Yeah.
impairment, yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, the lower you go down, the more impaired the
Mhm.
swimmers are. So every single category has its own like number bracket. So depending on how many numbers that you've scored overall, will
Mhm.
depend on what category you're put in. And then they also watch you race. So usually there's 3 different categories. So S is for freestyle and
Okay.
like backstroke and flying, stuff like that. SB is for breaststroke and SM is for medley, so when you do all the strokes together.
Mhm.
And so if you're having all the strokes, which majority of people do, in racing, you then have to be watched. You have to do a medley event, a breaststroke event, and a freestyle event.
Oh,
And then obviously they'll watch you race, check that nothing's different or nothing's changed, or they don't want to review you. And then it will be either confirmed or you'll be confirmed but put on review for however many years.
geez, oh, that's they get that down to an exact. So then they gave you the clarification of that sounds like an excruciating process that as well.
Yep.
Once I think you said they checked the joint. How far do they just do shoulders and hips, or do they go as far as like elbows,
Everything.
wrists,
Yeah, fingers,
knees?
wrists, knees, ankles, toes, like everything.
What the Christ? I find that it's weird. It's weird the mental images that you think up when somebody explains these things to you. Because I don't. I've just got you like float, like you said, you're floating in the pool, right? And one guy's just there, just holding your hands, just sort of bending your fingers around. It's gonna be like this guy's a psychopath. Like go over, just try to float.
Well, they don't do that while you're in the pool. That's on the bench test. But yeah, no,
I hope not. It's just the way my brain works sometimes.
it's a very long-winded process. It usually takes a few hours, and they're always a few hours behind. So you end up spending the whole day at the pool.
Oh, terrible. Do you try to get yourself in first though? Like, I know at least if I'm
You
first,
don't get to pick.
oh, I'd be gunning for it. I was like, I'll take the 9 a.m. slot. Like, I'll get there for 9 a.m. just so I know I'm not
That would be
waiting.
nice.
There we go. Another thing higher ups. We need more swim caps, and Tully needs to go first on classification day because she wants to be out of there at a reasonable time. She's got things to do. Okay, right. We'll go back. We've done the classification. We're now there. Let's put you into correct me if I'm wrong, it was S4, SB5, and SM5.
So currently, I'm an S5, SB4, SM5, but it has changed. So
Mhm.
when I first got classified, I was actually an S9.
Was this at
Um,
Berlin then? You were S9.
yeah, and
Okay.
then over the years, my disability's gotten worse with the dystonia.
Mhm.
So I've actually dropped. So now I'm an S5, but I have decided because I'm literally just upper body, and
Yeah.
I have contractures in my shoulder, so and I'm weak on my left side and struggle with my left hand and wrist. So I'm literally just upper body. My upper body doesn't function fully, and breaststroke's a leg-based stroke. So if you can imagine someone that's got like not full movements of their arms trying to do
Yeah.
breaststroke and trying not to drown, it doesn't
Yeah.
really end very well.
That's quite a commitment you've really put yourself to that.
Yeah. So
You're
since getting back into it, I was always like, well, everyone has all the events. Like, I'm never going to race breaststroke. I'm never going to race fly or IM,
Mhm.
but I should like. I want to be like everyone else. Like, I don't want to take the risk of going to a meet and them saying, "Oh, well, you haven't got an M or an SB classification, so we're not going to let you race," which wouldn't happen. But I was just worried about like, oh,
Yeah.
like, what will happen if I get to Tokyo and they don't let me race? And I only swim freestyle, and I've started doing backstroke. But for that, you only need an S classification. But I have decided now that my classification review this year, I'm only going to have an S classification because last time for trials for Tokyo in 21, it was horrendous. Like I had other SB4s in the same race as me,
Mhm.
and as an SB4, it's 100 meters. As an SB3, it's 50. So it's 100 meters, and I got to 20 meters, and I was almost at the wall to turn, and everyone
Uh-huh.
else had already finished the 100 meters.
Wow.
It
That's
was very bad.
that's it's crazy how that can be such like a discrepancy in the competition of that.
Mm,
Even because to me, looking in as who's traditionally looked at more of like able-bodied sports than the Paralympics, I've not watched as much as I should. As possibly as like you've just explained that to me. What looks like a really vigorous breakdown of making sure everybody's in the same level of competition. But then for you to say, yeah, there's still a disparity of these people are already touching the 100 and you're trying
yeah.
to get to the 20, it shows how there isn't probably one method that suits everything. Is probably the
No,
best way to say
and
that then.
you're always gonna have a higher and a lower class. There's always gonna be someone who's the most impaired and the least
Mhm.
impaired in every single classification. But in swimming, it is better than some sports, like in athletics, that I started doing a few years ago, for cross training. I didn't realise that you only race against people with your impairment. So wheelchair races, for example, with cerebral palsy, there's
Mhm.
only two categories, a T34 and a T33. So you either have um, lower limb impairments, like basically you're impaired from the waist down, and you're in the
Mhm.
same category. So whether that's mild and you can walk or severe and you can't walk, you're in the same category, you're a T34. If
Oh,
you've got
wow.
upper body and arm impairment, you're a 33. But again, no matter how severe or mild your upper body impairment is, you're still in a T33. So it's and they're not even really included in anything anymore. So a T33 generally has to race against the T34 less impaired people. So compared to like other sports like athletics, where there's like two categories for each person with cerebral palsy, it's definitely better. But I found it harder over the years in swimming because we're all mixed, and no matter what your disability is, it's
Mhm.
done on your functional ability. So when I was an S9, I raced against amputees, and in 2015, I obviously was still quite young at that point, and I'd
Mhm.
massively improved on my butterfly, and that's always been my favourite stroke, which I'm kind of good. I can't swim anymore because I'm now one arm and no legs, and it doesn't work very well, and it's probably why my shoulder's so dodgy from trying to swim one arm
I was gonna
fly.
say you're trying to do butterfly with one arm is the only thing propelling you forward.
Yeah, it doesn't turn out very well.
I'll let you.
Um,
So on this season, I've got a guy who's actually from the same school as me, Gregor Swinney. He represented Scotland at the Commonwealth Games in the fly, the 50-meter fly, and he gave me. I've actually already recorded his episode, so spoiler for listeners in the next couple of weeks. That's coming up, but he explains how the butterfly works. And then knowing what I know about that, and you saying I tried to do it with only one arm, I think that is nigh on impossible.
Yeah, even with like with both arms without legs, it's really difficult because you need the movement of the hips to get the undulation
Yeah.
to propel yourself forward and not just be really flat on the water. So yeah, one arm is like impossible. Um, but like I know swimmers with like we have a swimmer I train with in Manchester who has a hemiplegia cerebral palsy, so she's affected on one side. So
Okay.
she does swim with one arm on fly and on freestyle, but she kicks with both legs. So
Okay.
it's a bit different.
Yeah.
um,
I suppose it's taking away the power sort of really, isn't it? Because the
yeah,
arms sort of kind of steer and sort of direct, and the legs and like you say, the hips and the legs are where the power really comes from, and that's true.
yeah. So back then, like, I improved massively on my fly, and I think about a month before the World Championships, I broke the European record, and I was the first person in Europe to go into 110, which I was like so happy about.
Mhm.
And so I got to Worlds, and in the fly, I beat Sarai Gascon, who's a Spanish swimmer who was expected, has always won, expected to win, and she wasn't very happy about it, obviously. And afterwards, in our after
I
party,
don't know many elite athletes that are happy about losing. To be fair, Tully.
the issue, like, I think it's slightly different now, but back then there was a big mix in the S9 category and the S8, S9, S10. When you had someone with more of an invisible disability like cerebral palsy, MS, like a neurological condition, versus an amputee, they were kind of at war with us because they were like, well, we can see our disability, we can't see yours.
Mhm.
Um, Even though obviously, like, I still used a wheelchair at that point, it was kind of obvious, but it's less obvious in water, if that made sense. But than an amputee.
Mhm.
And we were at the after party, and we were all pretty drunk at this point, but she came up to me and literally started screaming at me, saying I wasn't disabled and I was a cheater and it's not fair and like shouldn't be an S9. And
What?
so there's a lot of like, yeah, there's definitely a big feud between the amputees and the non-amputees that have to race against each other in swimming.
Wow. I like if you were to think there's one place where that doesn't happen, if somebody be like, you're not really disabled, like you wouldn't think that the Paralympics or the World Champions would be where this takes place.
Honestly, I think it's the worst for it, especially for people that have more invisible disabilities or more mild impairments,
Mhm.
and they're racing against someone who's missing a limb, which is obviously really obvious. Yeah, it can be a nightmare. And then you feel
Wow,
like you constantly have to like justify your disability and your classification.
that's that's wild. So how were you when that was? Because that wasn't at Berlin. We were talking about Berlin. Where was that a bit?
So that was 2015, the World Championships in Glasgow.
Mhm. That's explains how you ended up drunk then if you were subject to Glasgow, but that's a different story. That's I can't I never had any idea something like that would happen. That's thrown me for six there. That's how do you handle that situation? Because you in 2015, how old would you have been there? Because we're about the same age. So
It's about 18.
yeah, so I was
Yeah.
going to say because that's quite a big conversation for somebody to sort of spring upon you after a few fruit shoots. Because
To be honest, like, because
how did you deal with that situation?
oh, I was quite drunk, so I literally kind of just sat there, and the
Be
worst
like
thing was,
outside now, 50 meters in the pool, winner takes all. It's like one of these like these movies where it's like we'll have the a real race in the quiet,
well, I mean, we were opposite a lake, so I wouldn't put it past her to be like, "Get in the lake."
in the like.
um, we were like in a like an after party that the event organisers like put on for us,
Mhm.
and the issue was that all of the other British swimmers, apart from the under-18s that weren't at the after party because obviously they weren't allowed to drink, had gone out to a club. But I drank too much, and I was like, I don't feel like going to a club because when I drink, I literally lose like pretty much all movement of my body, like even my arms. And it's really hard to push my chair, so I'm just like, I'm not going to go to a club when I can barely move.
Especially
So I
Glasgow, it's all
stayed back.
it's like a disaster waiting to
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. So I stayed back, and all my teammates were at club. And she literally came up to me, so I was just there like, "I don't know what to do, like, I don't know anyone," like, so I was just kinda looking around, like, because there were, like, media people in there, like, some of the journalists and that, and I was kinda looking
What?
around like, "Do I recognise anyone? Can anyone help me?" Um, and then some of the Irish team came up to me and, like, rescued me and walked me back to the hotel.
What?
'Cause I was just sat there, like, staring at her while she was, like, shouting at me, and I was like, "I don't wanna move in case she, like, hits me, but I also don't wanna just sit here."
Just sit here and take it. That's oh my god.
Yeah, she's
Wow,
quite aggressive.
that's I'm sorry, but that's very sore loser as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's not
Yeah.
sportsmanship at all.
No, yeah. Don't be like that. Listeners,
No.
don't be like that. That's oh well. I was going to talk about Glasgow, so that seems like a good time. We'll quickly run back through Berlin. No. I want to talk about. I'll edit this so this swings around nicely, and if not, I'll just leave it in because it shows how conversations normally go. Because I go off on tangents, so it's nice to see that somebody else does it as well, and I love that. So we'll talk about Berlin, then we'll go into Glasgow quite quickly. Yeah, you basically went to Berlin on this new podium potential bracket that you've been put in. First international competition. Mum was screaming to the high heavens in the spectators, but that's just what a loving mum does, so we won't hold that against her. Mrs. Kearney, you've done a great job. Don't let Tully give you grief for it. She might know a bit more about swimming than you, but that's a different story for a different day. 7 medals in age grades. How was it when you kept winning these medals? Because obviously, like, had you built up the international competition in your mind, and then you just kept winning medals, and you're like, this is quite easy, really?
To be honest, I think I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Like, I just wasn't. I just remember like being overwhelmed. Like, it's the biggest pool I'd ever been to, and Berlin's quite cool. So you can either the pool is really weird. Like when you're on the road, all you can see is a massive field of grass, and then there's a random lift. It's literally the pool is an underground bunker.
That's pretty cool.
It's like so weird. And everyone's like, "Where's the pool? Where's the pool?" And it's literally underground. So like you get a lift down, and there's 2 levels. So I think before we were at the top level, and you go on, and it takes you on to like the spectator level,
Okay.
which is like really weird. And then on the spectator level is that there's actually another pool. So there's 2 pools kind of next to each other, 50-meter pools, but they're on different levels. One's higher than the other one. Like the competition pool's lower, and the training pool's higher up.
Okay.
Which is kind of a pain when you've got loads of wheelchair users in the same race, and there's one little lift that fits 1 chair at a time. Kind of difficult for everyone to move around. But like, it's just
I
massive.
love the logistics of these people that have hosted like a para event, and they just see all of you guys with your wheelchairs and just one lift. And I know there's like one event coordinator just with their head in their hands, just be like, "Oh, we've fucked it. We've absolutely fucked
Yeah,
it."
they're like calling you in the call room, and you have like you have to be there like it's normally about 15 minutes before, and they're calling you, and they're like, "Oh no, she's still in the lift." It's just like ridiculous. But they
That's
are
amazing.
generally like if you're literally stuck in a lift or stuck in a queue waiting for a lift, they are generally, unless it's like a Paralympic Games, they are generally a bit lenient because you can't exactly help that.
Yeah.
You just have to like make sure you leave like 20 minutes to get down a lift. But yeah, it was just like I don't know how many spectators that pool holds, but it was just massive. And then like at the ceiling, like over the 50-meter pool, there's the flag of every single country. So it was just like a really cool atmosphere. We were sat in the stands, which I think that was the first time I'd been sat on the stands because at like low level meets you're always sat poolside. But
Mhm.
like at big meets, they've got all the cameras and stuff, and you can't be on poolside. So, you know, that was like a really cool thing. And obviously being part of the team and like being with the older ones, like learning from them and like kind of copying what they do, like see how they recover between races. And I was just
Mhm.
kind of like overwhelmed and trying to take it all in, to be honest.
I mean, it sounds like you did all right, and whoever you copied clearly knew what to do because I have it down here as you had 7 medals at age grades. Then you also picked up 2 silver and one of your first golds at Open at that event.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I like that you confirmed that. Yeah, that means I did my job, right?
I remember I got 9, yeah, because it was really nice. Like at the end of the meet, I remember like the Berlin Open's lovely because even if you like come 30th, you get a certificate. So like
Okay.
even in some of the races I did where I didn't medal, you get a certificate for every single one, and the ones that like I think within top 10 you would get a medal anyway. So like we had like a little presentation back in the hotel before we went home, and like they got the older like experienced athletes to present them to us. So it was like a really nice experience
Oh,
and
I
like
love that.
integrating us into the team.
Oh, that's great. I love it when they do stuff like that. I think like
Yeah.
team bonding and especially age grade when there's like a lot of passing because like a lot of people come in and come out. So it's
Mm,
nice that they had the older people to sort of be like, we're going off to this now, but like
yeah.
this is your sort of mantle to take on.
And they always like at camps and like lower like UK competitions, we were always if there were like younger ones in the team, we were always with the younger ones.
Mhm.
But at bigger meets, they always put us in a hotel room with an older experienced athlete so that they could kind of guide us of how you're supposed to do things and how everything works, and you know like so we could learn from them.
I love that I know there's a thing they do at Edinburgh Uni in the PE part, like the PE education that do that. They call it parents and children. So it's quite nice that they do it. They're like, here's the older head and like sort of look after you.
Yep.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. Your first adult level comp or open level, I probably should say. Um, no, we'll talk about that. So we spoke about the funding that got you on to world class development funded athlete, did it not? After
Yeah.
Berlin, so how did that then change your life? How was that different to the podium potential athlete?
So that's what it was.
Oh,
So
so they're the
that's
same
what
thing.
Parylmpain Tully, yeah, so they
Okay,
changed all
right.
the
Okay.
names. So
All right.
the development is now what's known as Podium Potential.
Okay, right. Okay. Okay. Just get that question. We're done. Good answer. Edit.
Hey, so sorry to interrupt the podcast. This is something I wanted to tell you about, and it's something I wanted to explain before I just go around throwing it everywhere, because this is something that was quite difficult for me to decide to do. It took a lot of deliberation and a lot of discussion with friends and family. I have now created an option where you can tip the podcast or you can reward the podcast if you feel the podcast deserves it. There is an option down below where I went on the internet, I found this website that wants to reward content.
2013. That was your first adult open level competition. That was Montreal.
That
Did
was
mum
such
fly out to that one?
She did, yeah. My brother did as well, actually.
Oh, bless him.
So when I was younger, like before we moved to Birmingham, we actually lived in Alberta in in Canada when my dad was posted there. So
What do you
like
think of Canada? I love it. I think it's great. Look,
as soon as like my mum
Vancouver.
heard, okay. But, like as soon as my mum heard it was in Canada, she was like, "Oh, we're definitely going." And it was just that was such a surreal experience, but it was a really good learning curve. So I went there like a really picky eater. I was at that point, I was at boarding school, and our coach was a little bit obsessed about girls going to boarding school get fat, and
How did he deduce that
I
one?
just so he would like come and watch our meals all the time. So a lot of us were underweight, and I was really underweight at that point. So like I couldn't afford to not eat and be fussy and like lose weight.
Mhm.
So I went there, and because back then, like, I was really weird, like, I wouldn't eat sandwiches, I don't know why, but, like, the lunch unless it was a Subway, like, I was just really weird, like, really picky. I've always been picky about, like, processed meat and, like, like, slabs, like,
That's
sliced
probably good to
turkey,
be there,
ham
though.
and
Yeah, that's probably good
yeah,
to be. So
um,
definitely eating turkey. Some of it's
not
definitely not
when
turkey.
it's, like, the only option, so, like, the lunch meal every day, because I think we were there about 10 days before it started, like, to get used to, like, time difference and everything and get over jet lag.
Mhm.
And like get a feel for the pool, and it was very different this competition. So the lunch options every day, because I think we used a few hotels, but most of the countries were in our hotel. So they just did a massive buffet for like all the countries, and every lunch was a deconstructed sandwich. You literally had to pick your bread, pick your meat, and then they wouldn't give us fruit. Like I kept asking for bananas, and they said no because we've not got enough for everyone. So the veg was raw broccoli and raw cauliflower, which at that age I was like, I'm not eating that. So I literally
I
like
wouldn't eat that now if somebody handed me raw broccoli or cauliflower.
like it got to the point that by the competition start, like within like just over a week, I'd lost like 7 kilos, and I was just really weak. So then I
That's
swam one
terrible.
race really well, but then I just didn't have any energy. So my mum had to keep sneaking in subways because they're not
Wait, right.
supposed to come to the hotel.
If you're losing 8 kilos, like, yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. And then like if there was food that I didn't like I wasn't allowed to ask for anything else. So I just wasn't really eating. But obviously that was a lesson to me that if you want to race well, you've got to eat.
Mhm.
But that pool was really cool because that was the last time that we were actually allowed to race outdoors. But the rules had changed that we weren't allowed to be technically in an outdoor pool. So the two pools were kind of next to each other like an L shape. So the competition pool was at the back long ways, and the other one was kind of width ways next to it. And the competition pool, they covered in a tent. So, like, the top of it was covered and the side of it kinda had, like, gaps, and they had all these, like, big, like, metal like, scaffold stands put up.
Mhm.
But it meant that when you were swimming, every time you breathed, you got blinded by the sun because, like, obviously it was really hot, and all the sun was, like, coming through the sides because there was nothing at the sides, like, no tents at the sides, just at the top. It was just like a metal structure. And then there were thunderstorms, so we couldn't warm up or swim down because the warm swim down pool had no coverage, and the indoor one had metal. So we were all just kind of huddled in the small changing village that was actually like made out of bricks, like while the thunderstorms went past. Because all of our team areas were tents, metal tents with like white teepees on, like
And that's not
fabric.
what you want to stand under in a thunderstorm.
No, and obviously like being in a wheelchair, I was like, I definitely don't want to be sat outside in my chair.
Oh, this.
So, it was an interesting experience. It was honestly one of the coolest world champs I've ever been to, though. The fact that it was
Mhm.
outside, it was in like a really cool country, like really nice and hot. We got a great tan, especially like training in an outdoor pool.
Happy
But
days.
it was, yeah, it was interesting. I probably wouldn't want to race a world champs in an outdoor pool covered by a tent again, to be
No.
honest.
Because like you said, that's no longer allowed, is it? Yeah, like all
No.
official meets are in indoor pools now, aren't they?
Unless I know the able-bodied guys, like, they're short course champs, they're allowed to be outdoors, but in,
Oh.
like, the long course, it has to be indoors.
What's the reasoning behind that? Is it just we've just decided that,
I
or
think it's the unfair advantage of the wind, the sun, like, especially
okay?
backstroke, you've got nothing to follow. Like, the
Oh
amount
yeah,
of
true.
instances where people swim into lane ropes, get tangled in them, like, so it's not fun.
Yeah, I'm sold. Indoor pools it is. Well, okay, so you gave us a beautiful bit of insight there as to the fact that the lovely Spanish lady decided to scream in your face after you claimed one of the medals at Glasgow. But what you didn't mention is you got 4 medals at Glasgow, and this was when you really started to become, from my perspective looking at it, you really started to become a force in the pool in your
Mhm.
subcategories at your strokes. How was Glasgow? Did you have a real, because by this point, like you said, you were 18 now, so had that competition mindset started to become a bit more prevalent in your brain now? You're like, oh, this is go time now. This isn't, hey, I'm quite good at this, and this is a lot of fun.
Not to be honest, at that point, no, I was still doubting myself quite a lot, and I
Okay.
hadn't raced internationally in 2014 because unfortunately I picked up a sickness bug at trials,
Hmm.
and it was kind of a infuriating thing. So with Commonwealths, the trials, the way they did it is they had the able-bodied trials in Glasgow, and then a week later, like there was a week gap, and then ours. But at the last few days of the able-bodied trials, they had, because obviously in the Commonwealths there's a couple of para events.
Hmm.
They had the trials for Commonwealths, the para swimmers, so I swam the 200 IM, and I would have had to do like I think something like a 6-second PB over 200 meters to qualify. So I knew I wasn't going to, but it was like a chance to kind of pre-race before racing, but also just to see what would happen. So I wasn't expecting to qualify.
Hmm.
But I swam and I actually did really well. I did a 4-second PB, but obviously still didn't qualify. But I wasn't upset because I wasn't expecting to, and I was still young at that age, and like I just didn't really. I knew it wasn't gonna happen, so I wasn't that bothered.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, in that week gap, I got really ill, and even though I'd swam at the same pool because it was a different competition, they wouldn't accept it as a medical appeal.
What?
So I did try and swim through it, but I swam really bad, so I basically didn't get to swim internationally that year. So the next year, I was like pretty nervous. I didn't actually qualify for 2015 Worlds. I was picked for a relay. Um, so I was feeling pretty like, oh, like I don't know if I should be here. Like, oh, like I don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, I'd swam really well the month before at the pool in Glasgow, the Scottish Championships, where I'd broke the record on the fly, the European record. And I'd recently moved to Manchester for the National Performance Centre, and I was working under Graham Smith. And that was kind of for me the start of a great relationship with him. And he's honestly one of the best coaches I had. And he came up to me and he could tell that I was feeling deflated. And he just said, like, because some of the athletes, I had so many individual races. I had 5 individuals and 2 relays. And obviously, for all of them, you've got heats and a finals. And
Hmm.
some of them are on the same day. So it's a lot of races to fit into 10 days. And I also had a shoulder injury. So it was some of the athletes that were for the relay, and obviously, like, we always want to win the relays. And we generally always do win the higher classification relays, the 34 points. Um, and some of the athletes were saying, "Well, maybe you should pull out of this race because it's on the same day as the relay, and we want you to win the relay." And I obviously was not having any of it. I was like, "Hang on, you can't tell me that I have to withdraw out of my individuals because you're not going to do that."
Yeah.
So I was like, "It's a bit contradictory." But like, obviously, I went to my coach, and he was like, he said to me, "Graham knows me better than I know myself, and he was always
Right.
quite at giving me advice, always knew what I needed." And he was the first coach that actually just knew what to say. And he came up to me and was like, "I don't want to put pressure on you, but if you swim well and you do everything like as I say and as planned, you're gonna come away as the highest medal earner for GB." And I looked at him and I was like, "You're mental." I was like, "That's not gonna happen." And it happened. And like I swam really well. Like his pep talks really helped. I kind of started to ignore everyone else and was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go and enjoy it. And yeah, I came away with 4 golds, a silver and a bronze, which is kind of mental. And GB's highest medal earner and broke the European record in the 100 fly again.
Hmm.
And
I love
I
that
think
you
we
slipped
won 9.
again quietly in there. You're like, ah, I broke that again. So,
Yeah.
so did you
'Cause I
break
kind
your
of
own
thought
world record? You broke your own European record at that point then?
yeah, and it was only a
Mhm.
month after I'd first broke it, so like that I think maybe that was my oh, no, I think that was maybe my 2nd European record. I think I already had it in the 400 freestyle. I broke the IM 200 IM record as well. And for me, that I was chasing the world record to the S9 category so fast because years ago there was an amputee swimmer who swam as an S9 and she was just rapid. So no one, like even now, a lot of the world records, no one's near them. So I was just trying to like get closer and closer and closer to a world record because I was still miles off him, even though I was the quickest in the world at that time by far. Um, but yeah, that was the first time where I was like, you know what, I am actually pretty good at this. That was the first time that I had confidence in myself that actually maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Maybe I can get to Paralympic Games, like maybe Rio's, going to be the break point for me, the point where I can actually start to make a name for myself and show what I can actually do. Because that was one thing that was disappointing at our competitions. There's not always that many people that come. And at Glasgow, I was obviously really excited. It was UK based, but we only had a 14 members team. So GB, we took 14 athletes, and that was it.
Yeah.
Because the national performance director at the time decided, even though obviously being in Glasgow is much cheaper, he didn't want to take athletes for experience. He only took athletes that were going to win medals. So there was only 14 of us, which meant that there was only 14 British families
Yeah.
in the stands. So that the stands were pretty empty, and it was pretty disheartening.
Yeah.
So,
Did you, when that's going on, did you? I know, like you said, you're very busy in the pool. You've got to cram in all these. Best part of what was that? 7 medals in 10 days. You won 4 golds, 2 silver, 1 bronze.
Yeah.
7. Yeah. Math isn't my strong point. Like you said, when there's only 14 of you, does that put like a real emphasis on like the togetherness and the team of it? Like, do you find you really come together because you knew there was so little of you there?
Honestly, that was the best team that I've ever been on because there were only a few of us. It was such tight knit. We were so close, and also like even though there were only 14, every single final there were at least 5 of them in the stand cheering for you.
That's great.
And like we've always had that kind of rule that if you're not swimming the next day, you're in the stands, you're cheering for everyone else. And if you finish competing, you're there every single night. So like that is just it makes such a big difference, especially like in Glasgow, the athletes, there was a temporary stand put on poolside because behind the pool there's a massive dead space, which is great because it's where you can do a lot of your prep stuff, where they can make the call rooms. So they can literally use scaffolding to make whatever. So they made stands that the athletes were sat on, and underneath was the call room. But it meant that they were literally on poolside, so you could hear them shouting at you. They were literally like a few meters behind you, behind the block.
That's great. I love that.
That was honestly, and then when you got out the pool, you had to walk past them to get to the media. So like you got to see them like as you came out. So it was really nice.
Oh, I love it. I love it when teams go that because what I traditionally and I think a lot of people might associate as maybe an individual sport rather than a team sport of swimming, because what people obviously say, excluding the medleys when you've got groups of people diving in over each other, you've got we just see the one person. I think the best example for my listeners might be when a lot of people saw Michael Phelps, they didn't think Michael Phelps was Team USA. You kind of just knew Michael Phelps as Michael Phelps who happened to represent the USA.
Yeah.
But like there is a big team camaraderie to it, and like you say, you're training at Sheffield Pool. You're part of the Walsall Swim Club. You are part of the Manchester City Swim Club. You're not Manchester City the football team, but City of Manchester football club. Yeah, they're part of a team. You're always part of a team, and there is that togetherness and there is that want for everyone around you to do well, which I think is great. And then obviously a few Spanish people go and ruin a few things every now and again, but they're by the by. But you got reclassified for Glasgow, did you not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that come about? Was this when you went from the S9 to the S5?
No. So this was just because at this point, did I know? No, I did know I had dystonia, but at this point my dystonia was getting slightly worse. So I was diagnosed at 16 with dystonia. We noticed that I had some symptoms that weren't typical of cerebral palsy. And we just didn't really know what it was. And unfortunately, dystonia is not very well known. So it took about 3 years to actually get diagnosed with it. And basically, it's a neurological movement disorder. It can be similar to cerebral palsy, but again, there's hundreds of different types. The type that I have is generalized dystonia. So I have a mixture of fixed contractures and like uncontrollable muscle movements. So the easiest way I can explain it now is, for me, like if I'm trying to, for example, like if I'm trying to use my quad, so I want to try and contract my quad, my hamstrings are extremely overactive, and part of that is from the cerebral palsy, but part from the dystonia. So usually like hamstrings and quads and bicep tricep, if you contract one, the other one relaxes. I can't contract the other one. So when I'm
Oh,
trying to move a muscle, both they're basically fighting against each other. They both switch on at the same time, which makes it really hard for me to move.
oh,
Um, so that's kind of the easiest way to explain dystonia is you imagine every time you try and move, you've got muscles fighting against each other. So
okay.
which obviously restricts movement, restricts quality of movement, which causes, like spasms, shaky movements, and contractures where you just can't move. So it's obviously something to come to terms with. But the reason that I got reclassified is because my dystonia had started to affect me to the point that I couldn't now get on the blocks without support. And you
Okay.
can't, when you're classified, you can't just add stuff. It has to be assessed. So I had to go through the classification system again to get reassessed because I needed that support to get on the block.
Hmm. Okay, so that support is in physically being lifted, like helped
What
onto the block, or just like help them stay
So
on.
I used to have someone stood. So I was stood side onto the block, and then there was
Mhm.
someone stood the other side with their hands out, and I would literally put all my body weight onto them
Oh, right.
and just
Okay.
throw myself on them while I was stepping up, and then they
Okay, and
would help me
then
steady myself and then step away.
okay, and then as you found out what dystonia you had dystonia and as it got classified, that then led to them sort of not stepping away as you were going to go with this sort of just like an extra sort of basically an armrest type thing or like somebody there.
Yeah, it's basically just to help you like get up the step because blocks are pretty high off the floor. I don't actually
Okay.
know how high. I've never measured it, but it's a pretty high step. So
A
when you've
couple of
got
feet, yeah, a couple of feet.
Yeah, when you've got a lower limb impairment, it's pretty difficult to get the force and the balance because the block's slanted, it's not flat. So
Hmm.
obviously it's slanted to get you in that optimal race position. But if you've got limited movement in, knees, ankles, hips, and you're
Yeah.
trying to stand on a obviously first time you're standing side on and you're leaning to one side and you haven't got I've never had a very strong core. So like trying
Mhm.
to balance as well, not only just stepping up, but then trying to balance, swivel yourself and bend down without falling in. Like it's definitely beneficial to have someone to hold on to.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds that sounds very beneficial. I find it really interesting because I actually know. Are you familiar with James Sutcliffe?
Yeah,
Yeah, I know him through a mental health group I did a lot of work. I think he's one of the most inspirational people I've ever spoken to in my life. But he's given me a quick explanation on dystonia before and how it affected him, and I find it really strange when I hear your situation with dystonia because, like you said, yours was a
it's
sort of
very yeah.
gradual thing, and like it took 3 years to become enough that you sort of assessed it and go, "Oh, I have dystonia." But his happened overnight. He
Yeah.
woke up one day with we didn't wake up with dystonia, but it like sort of took a hold just overnight,
Mm.
which
Well,
is incredible.
I had certain things like my first symptoms, which
Mhm.
is actually quite typical of generalized dystonia. So a lot of people that develop it in younger, like kind of teenage years, it's quite common to get it in teenage years. And usually the first symptom is what's happened to me is my left foot turned in and it wouldn't go out. And we knew that that wasn't cerebral palsy because it can happen with cerebral palsy, but it happens over time for muscle shortening. It doesn't just suddenly happen,
Yeah, okay.
and it wouldn't straighten. And
So when you say turn in, does like it actually pointed towards the other
yeah,
foot, or was it turned in as in like rolled? Or
like pointed in
oh
towards the
right,
other
okay,
foot, and it wouldn't go back. And obviously, I've got other symptoms that aren't as severe as that. But again, like everyone with dystonia is completely different. Some people wake up and it's just there. Some people it's like over years. And for me, with my type, unfortunately, what's quite common is that you rapidly progress for 5 years. So over
okay,
a 5-year period, I kept getting worse and worse and worse, and then I slowly started to stabilize. So by the time I was around 20-ish is when I started to finally settle.
okay. Wow, that's So how does this? Because obviously, what people like myself would probably see from you is you obviously have these disabilities. You know, this is around 2016 time. You now have dystonia, and and you've always had your cerebral palsy. Unfortunately, you've been dealt this tough hand, but you're showing great adversity, and you're showing that it's not a limitation because you're taking medals home for fun at the competitions, and you're still active on social media. You're still doing all these things. You're okay. I have to do things differently to able-bodied people, but I'm still doing them. There's nothing stopping me here. How does this affect personal life? Like, for example, do you require I'm trying to really word this in a way that shows the respect that it demands. So if I say anything that's out of turn, please like don't take it offensively. I'm not trying to cause offense, but it's like, do you require additional care in certain aspects of your life still, even though you have all these what people would consider athletic achievements, and you have these minor, like you say, the great example is like people are saying your physical disabilities aren't as visual as physical amputees or things like that, or short
Mm.
stature.
So to start with, no. Up until I think it was about 2017, where it was like the end of 2016, start of 2017, where it got to the point where it was really bad.
Okay.
And that's actually at that point I had to stop swimming. I had to withdraw from Rio a week before I was supposed to fly out. I lost my funding. I lost my place at the National Centre, and I was I had constant nerve pain from the shoulder issues. I couldn't lift either arm above shoulder height. I had very little use of my legs. My core was really weak. I basically had lost a lot of my function, and I
And
had
this has
to
just been
relearn.
caused by a compound of the dystonia and the
Yeah, just
cerebral
a
palsy.
massive progression of dystonia.
Mhm.
We had a coach who wasn't very nice, treated us extremely badly, who eventually was fired for basically a lot of us reported him for basically abuse, and
Okay.
he was fired for that. From that, I have PTSD. So, like, all of this stressful stuff, like with dystonia, stress can make it a lot worse and trigger it to get worse a lot quicker. I'd had a few falls and I fell onto my shoulder, and again, trauma. Like some people develop dystonia from having a spinal injury, being in a car crash. Like sometimes trauma can cause it to react. And
Okay.
for me, the stress and then falling onto my shoulder and getting a soft tissue injury is what caused the dystonia to move to my shoulders. Um, so I then had to basically relearn. I wasn't even thinking about sport at that point. I had to relearn how to move, like how to get dressed, how to basically function, how to get myself to uni, like how to be able to sit through a lecture without crying in pain. Um, it was rough. Like it was a really rough time. It was really hard to deal with. Going from a part-time wheelchair user to a full-time wheelchair user, not even be able to walk around a Tesco Express anymore. Like that. That was kind of the most annoying thing. Is those little things
Mhm.
that I could still do that was easy. Like I could run into Tesco Express and get a loaf of bread. But now I have to get my chair out, and it takes so much longer. It takes so much more effort. Um, and that was kind of the biggest thing at that point. I wasn't really thinking, "Oh, I'm not gonna swim again." It was more
Mhm.
of like, "What am I gonna do with my life?" Like, I kind of fully identified as an athlete, and I was like, "Well, who am I now if I can't swim?" But I did have carers before, but I didn't need them for as many things. So, like, if I decided to walk around a shop, I had to get someone to hold like, I was on crutches, couldn't walk without crutches, so had to get someone to obviously, like, push the shopping or have a
Mhm.
basket. Um, and I was quite stubborn at that point, and I didn't wanna use my chair every time I went to supermarket unless I obviously needed to, unless I was really tired. And I had, like, help for folding, washing, and just general stuff, but I could still cook myself quite easily. Like, there were things that I didn't need help with. Um, so it was only really, like, once or twice a week for a couple of hours, and then it came to the point where I needed help pretty much every day to do a lot of stuff. And, like, things you wouldn't think about, like, even where I live now, the bin storage is outside, and
Mhm.
there's a lock pad. So, like, for me, having to press buttons and then turn something really quickly is really difficult because it's not only you've got to plan how you're gonna do it, I can't go from pressing a button to turning the little turny thing quick enough for the door to
Okay.
actually open. And the fact as well, it was obviously really high up, and the bins are really high because 'cause they're like the industrial ones, not
Like
like a
the
normal.
yeah.
um, so even things like that are, like, really challenging that I'd have never thought about when I could walk, and I think
Mhm.
other people wouldn't necessarily think of. But yeah, so I kinda just really like, I was lucky that I still had uni, that I'd already started uni in Manchester, kinda threw myself into that, had to move out of the swimming flat because I was in a British swimming flat,
Mhm.
moved into halls, which was a horrendous experience. Um, and it's just, like, so loud there, and when you struggle to sleep anyway from pain, and then you've got students up all hours of the night, like,
Yeah.
just don't sleep, like, it just doesn't help. Um, and then I think as well, like, that was kind of the most eye-opening thing for me is that I was in denial a lot that I was struggling with depression, and I just didn't want to accept it, and then when I moved into halls, there were 7 of us in halls, and 5 out of 7 of us were on antidepressants. And that
Wow.
was, like, made me realise, well, actually, this is quite a normal thing for people my age, and most people haven't really been through all this stuff. So, that kinda made me feel a bit better about it. However, having 5 people on antidepressants probably wasn't the best planning of putting them all in the same flat
Yeah,
because
that's.
we would just sit there drinking alcohol, which wasn't exactly the best thing to do.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
So yeah, don't if you're struggling with mental health, don't just sit and drink alcohol. It literally just makes things worse. It does not help.
Yeah, I agree with that statement.
So yeah, I soon pulled myself out of that, and I just don't drink anymore because now I just I don't really care for it anymore. But I kind of like realized quickly that I need to stop because it's not helping. Like there's no reason that I'm doing it. I'm just doing it just to kill time, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, so after about a year, my mum was like, well, my mum had started a master's swim club in Birmingham, and I was still like pretty much heading home every weekend because my carers were in like midweek, so I would
Mhm.
generally drive home to Birmingham every weekend just so my mum could look after me, basically. Um, and the one of my old swimming coaches had made a master squad, and a lot of the swimmers in it were parents of kids I used to swim with, and like my mum had started swimming with them, and she was like, "Well, why didn't you come along?" And at that point, I was kind of like, "Well, I'd rather never try to swim again and like not know, rather than get
Yeah.
in and realize I can't swim," because I was like, I'd just be devastated all over again if I can't swim. But somehow she just knew that I'd figure out a way. Like she didn't think I'd ever get back into swimming again, but she just wanted me to know, like if I went on holiday and I wanted to like float in the pool or go in the beach, like on in the sea on the beach, she wanted me to know that I could do it,
Yeah.
and she didn't want me to like miss out and feel like I couldn't. And even like if you go for like family swim, you're just floating around. She just wanted me to know that I could. And
It comes back to like you said at the start, and it's like you don't feel like you're in that different category. Like even if you're just in the water,
yeah,
you still feel like you're there.
but I think at this point as well, it was I didn't know how people were gonna react. I didn't know how to react to people that knew me before. I didn't know how they were gonna react to me. I just didn't
Mhm.
really know what to do. I didn't know whether I need to explain myself. I didn't know whether I don't say anything. Like, do I just not look at them? Do I avoid them? Do I never speak to anyone again that I knew before? It was kind of like I just overthought everything, and I was just like, I don't know what to do. Um, but I was really lucky that my mum eventually convinced me to go, and I started in the learn to swim lane. So we
Mhm.
had a coach in that was like literally figuring out what I could do, what I couldn't do, and getting me back into it. And within a year, I'd gone up. So it was a 4-lane pool. I'd started and learned to swim, and within a year, I was in the quickest lane, beating everyone.
How was that?
Yeah.
That's an incredible story in itself. Just even if you completely like just take that one aspect of I went from learn to swim lanes the fastest in a year. Again, that's incredible on its own. But how was those learn to swim lesson days when you're thinking, I've got medals in this, and I'm having to literally teach myself how to do the basics of this again? How was that,
I hated it.
like emotionally?
Yeah, I was embarrassed. Like, absolutely hated it. Like, everyone knew me as a
Mhm.
world champion. They expected me to go to Rio and come at home with at least 3 gold medals. And I didn't go. I felt like a failure. I felt like I let everyone down. And I was also really embarrassed, like the fact that I know people were obviously worried about me and like worried about what had happened and stuff, and people don't mean to stare, but it's also like everywhere you go where people know you, they're like, "Oh God, what's happened to you?" And it's just like, "Ugh, do I
Yeah.
really have to explain it again?" Like it was just,
And that, I suppose you have to do it like you don't just like you can't just do it once. You have to
yeah.
every time you see somebody, you have to almost relive it, which is tough.
I think because I knew these people, one way it was harder because they knew what I was like before, but in the other
Mhm.
way it was easier because I felt like I could trust them. And like within a couple of sessions, I did feel much better. But I just kind of thought like, um, wasn't really thinking about race internationally, but I was just kind of thinking like, this was the one thing that I thought I was gonna do forever. Like, when I retire, I was always gonna keep swimming because it's always been my thing, and I used to spend 28 to 30 hours a week training. So even when I was getting back in, I was doing like maximum an hour a week, and I still had
Mhm.
all these hours where I was just like, I don't know what to do with myself. Um, and obviously, like I put loads of weight on because when you're training like 70K a week, you can eat whatever you want. Well,
Yeah,
obviously,
you're just
healthy,
burning
but
calories,
you
aren't you?
eat
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Like you literally, like I think I was having like 5 meals a day at one point, and like loads of snacks because I needed it because I was training a ridiculous amount. And when you stop all exercise, and then also you can't walk anymore, you're in a wheelchair like
Mhm.
full time. You just
What
don't
was it?
burn
It's like
any calories.
because swimming, it's the 1-to-1 rest to work ratio, isn't it? Because there's no
Mm,
impact. So yeah,
yeah.
you're churning out kilometers.
Yeah, so I used to do like nine 2-hour sessions a week in the pool, sometimes 10, and then like a good few hours, like 2 hours twice a week in the gym,
Mhm.
sometimes 3. So it was a lot of work. And yeah, so going from that to starting again. But so after I kind of got to the point where I could swim and I could fit into kind of a club environment, I decided, because I was still at Manchester Met, they honoured my sports scholarship. So they pay for your City of Manchester swim fees. So it meant obviously I didn't have any
That's good of
funding.
them to honour that, though. I think
Yeah.
that's yeah.
So they pay for your fees and your training sessions. So I literally all I had to pay for was my ASA swim membership, so that I could actually be like a registered member of the club.
Mhm.
And obviously it was a massive weight lifted off. I didn't have to pay for S&C. I got one-on-one S&C. And at first I was nervous starting with a new coach that hadn't worked with swimmers, hadn't worked with disabled people. Honestly, one of the best S&C coaches I've ever had. It was like he reached out to people who worked with para athletes. He reached out to like British swimming, like because they had MMU Sport had a connection with British para swimming, obviously being in Manchester, and
Mhm.
like did research online and was just really open to asking me. And there was another athlete, Hannah Dines, who actually got me into athletics, who's a paracyclist, went to Rio, and he worked with both of them.
Was she the
And
one on
he,
your story the other day? I think I saw you two. What was that?
no, that was another athlete, but Hannah
Ah.
did actually get me into a frame running. But she's a lovely girl, honestly, really, really kind. And he was just amazing with us. Like he sat us down, like we went through what we can and can't do, and just kind of both we all learned together. And he was just honestly amazing. And I got physio support, so stuff that I wouldn't have been able to afford because I wasn't on funding anymore. I just
Mhm.
got, and that made such a big difference. And I started training with City Manchester with Matt Walker, who actually was a teammate of mine years ago.
Mhm.
He has ataxic CP, so it's kind of like a shaky type of CP. And he was an S7 swimmer, like world Paralympic European champion. So obviously a great person to have as your coach. And it took him a while because he'd known me as an S9 swimmer. It did take quite a long time for him to realise my limitations, like my new limitations, and
Yeah.
that I because he was trying to get me to do leg kick, and I literally would just be laying there, and I now have no use of my legs in the pool. So like unless my legs are touching something like the wall, I can't feel them. I don't know where they are, and I can't move them. So I'm quite lucky that I still get a bit of push off of the wall after a tumble turn when my feet touch the wall. But apart from that, I can't use them. I don't know where they are.
Okay.
So like he was trying to get me to do leg kick, and I was literally just floating there for like 5 minutes, not moving. I looked around and I was like, Matt, can I stop now? Like I'm not gonna move. And eventually realised that yeah, actually this isn't doing anything.
Bless him. He must have felt quite guilty when he was. He was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
I've asked the girl that can't feel her
well,
feet to kick."
yeah. And then once you realise like, and because I still struggled a lot with nerve pain and shoulder pain, there were
Mhm.
some times I was just in too much pain and I just needed a break. So we started doing like a mushroom float. So basically, you grab your arms, tuck up to your knees, put your head under, like tuck your head under like you're a little mushroom, and you just float. And it used to petrify the lifeguards because I can hold my breath for quite a long time. And he used to like sometimes he'd tap me on the head like you're still breathing.
It's,
Um, but
you know it's a long time if your coach has to pull your head out and go, "You are still
yeah.
alive," right? Yeah.
But, like, it was just, like, a really good reset, like, I was in loads of pain, so I just literally go into my little mushroom float in my own little world underwater, which has obviously always been my happy place, and it would just kinda reset, and if it didn't work, I'd get out. If it did work, then I could carry on, and then if I struggled again, I'd just do it again for a few
Wow.
minutes, and then I'd carry on again, and it just worked really well. And then I ended up going to trials, so that was when I was reclassified again to an S5, and that was kind of
Which
a
is where
shock
you're
to me.
still at to this day, and you're still at the S5
Yeah.
to this day. Yeah.
So that kind of shocked me because I knew that I was a lot more disabled than I was. But actually having it written down in paper and going like it's kind of unheard of to drop 4 classifications in swimming or in any
Okay.
sport and to go from a 9 to a 5. Unfortunately, there are people that cheat in swimming. Not just I think in para sport, it's not as much drug cheats, it's classification, it's intentional misrepresentation, unfortunately, a big issue. So when someone like me drops um classification, like drops from an S9 to an S5 straight away.
It gets a lot of attention. Yeah.
There's athletes that I knew for years that ignored me because they thought I was cheating. Like some of them ignored me for years until they realised. So I lost a lot of friendships. I didn't really know how to approach it and how to approach people, and I didn't feel like I should have to justify the fact that I've got a progressive condition.
No, absolutely
There's
not. Yeah.
there's a magazine, an American magazine, absolutely hate. I think it's terrible, called Swim Swam
Right.
online, and they write articles about all like swimmers, able-bodied and para, in a way, and they have a comment section that's unmanned, so they write it in a way
'Cause
that's
that's
gonna
always safe
play
on
you off
social
against
media.
people. So
Yeah.
they do it in a way that's gonna make you react. So they don't write all the facts. They do it in a way that makes people angry, so they're gonna write, so it wasn't just me that got classified that time, there were other athletes, so it wasn't just aimed at me, but there were so many comments saying, "Oh, she's cheating." Oh, like, "Oh, how can she be an S5? She doesn't have muscle wastage." Well, if you knew what dystonia was, that my muscles are always switched on, you
Mhm.
would know why I don't have loads of muscle wastage. Like, if you knew that I had a progressive condition, you would know that I am actually more disabled now. Like, if you watched the live stream of me swimming, you would see how much I struggle. And they were saying things like, "Oh, she's gonna break all the world records straight away," and all this stuff. It took me 3 years to break the world records. Like, it wasn't straight away.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just that thing that I felt like everyone was staring at me thinking I was a cheat. And I'm not a cheat, like, I wasn't cheating, but it's so hard when it happens so frequently, it's so hard to prove that you're not a cheat because
Mhm.
people assume you are. Um, but I ended up getting reclassified, and then at that meet, I surprised everyone, and I qualified for Europeans in 2018. And that was
Mhm.
kinda like, "Oh, okay, this is, weird." I didn't really know how I felt about it. I didn't really wanna be around British women at that point because, like, the coach had been sacked. A lot
Mhm.
of the staff had changed, but I was still worried that it was gonna be
It was
similar,
still
that I was
associated, yeah, you still had that association with it.
yeah. And obviously with the PTSD, again, I was in denial about it at that time, and I was like, "Oh, I'm fine," like, 'cause to start with, I would panic every time I drove towards Manchester. Every time I got into Manchester, I'd panic. And then it got to the point where I kind of got numb to it, and I wasn't happy about being in Manchester, but I could drive into Manchester without any symptoms. And then the first time I went to the pool, I had a panic attack. But then it got to the point where it was fine, but with City of Manchester, we swam upstairs in the main level pool.
Mhm.
British Swimming's underground, so it's completely enclosed, like, you can't see it. And, when I made the Europeans team, I had to go train downstairs for a week as, like, kind of like we had, like, a mini holding camp thing to get everyone that was gonna be on Europeans team together. And that was, like, I really struggled, like, going downstairs again, obviously the same, like, looked exactly the same, like, there were some
Yeah.
people that were similar, like, the same people, mostly were new, but I just couldn't cope with it, like, it was really difficult to cope with, and that was kind of the first time I realised and actually accepted that I had PTSD.
Right.
Um, and yeah, that was really difficult, so I went to Europeans. Unfortunately, I had to get reclassified again because dropping so many classifications meant that they wanted to make sure that I wasn't a cheat. So
Mhm.
I was reclassified at,
Especially, I assume all
20.
the noise doesn't help at that time as well, because
No.
once you get reclassified and then everybody else starts going, "They're cheating," I suppose they
Mm,
almost
yeah.
have to do it again to sort of prove
Oh, yeah,
themselves as well that
definitely.
they've not done it
And
wrong.
obviously, like, I was really nervous about going to Europeans and
Yeah.
seeing people that I hadn't seen since 2015, and I'm thinking that I'm a cheat. Like, I was like, "I don't know how to react." Like, what if someone else has a go at me? Like, I was just like, "I don't know what's gonna happen." Like, what if people call me cheat? Like, what if, like, I don't know, like, I was just it was going around in my head, like, I don't know what to expect, I don't know what to do. And unfortunately, the classifiers that I got at Europeans didn't know what dystonia was, didn't know how to test for it, didn't know how basically for me, the more I try and move, the more dystonic I get. So the more I
Mhm.
think about movement, the harder it is for me to move, and the worse my movement is. So when I'm swimming really slowly, I'm less dystonic than when I'm swimming at high speeds.
Okay.
So in the water test, if you get me to only swim at low speeds, I don't look that dystonic. If you get me to swim at race pace, I'm way worse. My control's a lot worse. But at that point, I hadn't really clicked in my mind that I should ask them to do quicker stuff. So we did threshold, which is like 50 beats below max.
Okay.
But threshold isn't really enough to show the full extent of my dystonia when I'm racing, because obviously this is all about racing, not about training for classification. And then because we had so many S6 swimmers, there's only 3 that can swim at a time for one country. So I was put up to a 6, and it was really annoying. I was put 1 mark into an S6 category. And they'd done things like they said I had movement in my left ankle, which I've got proof that I have no movement from my medical
Mhm.
evidence. So we were able to appeal on that grounds, but we didn't actually end up having to appeal because when they watched me race, they picked it up straight away and brought me back into reclassification.
Yeah.
The issue was that my main race was on day 1, the 200 freestyle, and because you have to be watched in competition and they have to see you in a freestyle event, but there were 4 other S6s and they were all quicker than me. So they weren't gonna GB weren't gonna pull out another S6. so that I could swim to try and get reclassified back down to an S5.
Yeah.
So I literally had to wait until day 5 to race. They saw me, picked me up straight away, and then I went that like afternoon, they put me into another test, another water test, and they literally made me swim about 2,000 meters of max swim. Like, exhausted me just to see what happens when I swim at max for a long time.
And obviously you're
Because
European champs right now, so you're trying to
yeah, oh
save as
yeah,
much energy as possible.
and this is day 5, and my 53 the S5 50 freestyle was a final only. So I did all this stuff, they put me back down to an S5, and the same day, within a few hours, I had to then race the 50 freestyle final.
Jeez.
And obviously I was emotionally drained, I was exhausted, I was feeling pretty defeated, by being put up to an S6, and, I raced, and it wasn't a great time for me, I came 3rd. So the next day, I got in, and it was the 100 freestyle S5, and my first 50, bearing in mind this is to feet, not to hand, so to feet should be slower, was 2.5 seconds quicker than what I did the day before, and it would have won gold by over a second. But it was like I was so emotionally drained and
Yeah.
stressed and fatigued. So it wasn't a great experience for me, but I was like, you know
I
what? At
I
least I'm
think
through it now.
the thing that amazes me, and I don't know if you pick it up, and I think the listeners probably pick it up because they're a lot more like me than you in the fact that we're not superhuman. You were you're like, I'm disappointed I got 3rd in a final. That's a medal, and you're like,
But I knew that I could win. That was the thing. Like when you know that you're quick enough to win and something goes wrong,
but
like you're always going to beat yourself up for it and always going to be like, oh, I should have won that.
that is that mentality that I think really separates people from the elite, because
Yeah.
like this
I'm
is
very
20
competitive.
this is 2018. In 2016 you've committed to never swimming again, and like you said,
Yeah.
you've just accepted it and moved into halls, and you're like, okay, I'm now going to be Tully Kearney without swimming. And then in 2 years you've gone, actually, sack that. I am an incredible person and I love swimming. I want to be the best swimmer. I want people to know me as the best swimmer. And you're back on a European Championship podium within 2 years.
So I think
That's phenomenal.
that was really like the first time I was like, you know what? Maybe I could go, like, because I kind of given up with the fact that I was going to go to Paralympics. Like the one thing I always wanted was to be able to call myself a Paralympian. So I missed out on London 2012 because I dislocated my shoulder at trials. I missed out on Rio because I had to withdraw. So I was like, I didn't want to get my hopes up because I didn't want the similar thing to happen. But I was like, you know what? Maybe I could. Like maybe I can get my titles back, and maybe I can keep getting quicker and try and be the best in the world again. Like even though I'm never going to be able to do 5 individual swims again, and I was only doing freestyle events. So like, I had a maximum of 3 medals, which unfortunately they keep taking the 50 freestyle out of the Paralympics for an S5, which is infuriating to me because an S5 is one of the most disabled out of all of the swimmers. And you leave a 200 freestyle in, but you take away a 50 freestyle, the one event that's the easiest for anyone to swim and that every single classification has, and you take it out of an S5 twice. They took it out in Tokyo and in Paris.
And it's quite weird as well because it's kind of, I suppose that's kind of like your version of the 100 meters, like in athletics, which is the big one everybody wants to watch, especially in the regular
It's the
Olympics. Like
exciting one. Yeah.
that's the one everybody sort of tunes in for. That's the one where people who don't watch athletics all the time pretend they know what they're talking about, and they're like, this is the year Usain Bolt's going to lose because I've read these 3 articles that have absolutely nothing to do with it. But
It's
yeah,
the one
that is baffling they take that out.
Yeah, for me, it's the most exciting race because there's enough of us for 3 heats at Worlds, but at the Paralympics we have to swim up as an S6, so it's infuriating. But they take loads of the S3 and S4 events out too because they say there's not enough of them, but there are enough of us for an S550, especially with S3 and S4 swimmers swimming up so that they can actually race it. Which, so if your event isn't included, you can swim up as a less impaired swimmer.
So you could be like somebody that focuses on fly, but say you're an S3 fly, but they don't do that. You could go, okay, I will compete in S4. Yeah. Okay.
So Ellie Chalice is an S3 British swimmer, and in Tokyo she was in my S500 freestyle because there wasn't an S3 or an S4 race. So she swam the heats as an S3, but obviously in an S5 race. So she's at a massive disadvantage, but it meant that she got that fun swim that she wanted for the heats. So sometimes it's to your advantage. So depending on programs, my plan for Paris if it fits, is to try and swim the 53 as an S6, just so that
Okay.
I've got, like a fun event, because I love swimming the 50, and also like the relays for the lower classifications, a 20-point relay is 50 meters. So
Okay.
that's something that I like doing, and that was kind of the biggest things in Tokyo. And then one of the biggest things I've learned is from being an S9 to an S5, there's a lot less opportunities for a more disabled athlete, for a high support needs athlete. We're not actually. I didn't realize being an S9. I was kind of oblivious to the fact that the lower classifications, lower than an S6, has never been included in the Commonwealths. Um, there's things like, when there's small camps and competitions where there's maybe only 2 or 3 members of staff from the governing body going, they can't really take us because we need support on the plane. We need support to get food. To some people need support to get dressed. We need support to get race suits on, get in the
Mhm.
water, get out of the water. Like, there's not enough staff when they're taking a small group to support people like me. So we do
That's
miss out.
crazy.
Um, and it is
That's
like we're not
that's
shown
that's
very
weird
much in
because
Tokyo.
I'm thinking this from what might be a very naive perspective, but surely there would be. I know it's difficult because, say, when you've got Rio, you can't really take a volunteer out of their life that much. But like, you'd think there would be these people that are willing to, like, for example, like mine. If somebody was like, "You can come along to GB, and all you do is make sure these people get from A to B," like you are literally just their pair of hands, so they don't have
Mm.
to use their hands.
We
Like,
we
I
do
would
have
I would sign up
staff.
for that. Yeah, like
Yeah. We do have some staff like that, but they're generally
yeah.
like PhD students or master students that are working within for extremists. So like
Mhm.
everyone, like the soft tissue therapists, nutritionists, sports science, they all kind of have to step in and help us. So they
Okay.
they, they have multiple roles at May Meets, but there's still, especially with racing suits, for females it's got to be a female member of staff,
Yeah,
and for males it's got to
exactly.
be males.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more females that need help than males, but there's more male members of staff I think at the minute than there are females. And we've gone through a merge. So British swimming is now one team. We're not para swimming, diving, water polo, and swimming separate. We're all one, including artistic swimming. So we've got a lot of staff members that have to work between all of the disciplines. So sometimes we're racing at very similar times or at the same time in different countries or at different places. So we
Yeah.
only have 6 members of staff that work for para swimming. The rest
Wow.
have to switch between all the sports. So it is really hard to balance it and to get all the support you need. So it kind of made me realize as well, like, someone like me, is it a disadvantage? Because I can't, like, some of the camps, being a centre athlete, when there's podium potential camps, we can go on them if we self travel. I can't self travel. So then I have to see if I can travel with the podium potential group, which isn't always possible. And it's not usually like if there's a competition, we go from Manchester because the performance centre is at Manchester.
Mhm.
When it's like a podium potential, it goes from London. So then I've got to go make my own way to London. So it's
So
just
then
like,
travel. Yeah.
yeah, it's just difficult. And the biggest thing for me is there's so many kids out there, not just in swimming, athletics, like other sports, like the frame running I do for cross training, that I've realised like there's so many kids that, because there's not many of us more severely disabled athletes or people like me with progressive conditions that get back into it and continue, they're not really shown what they can do. Like, for example, I know a family in Birmingham that have got 2 disabled sons, and their sons, if they watch the TV, one of them, yeah, like, he loves wheelchair basketball and he plays wheelchair basketball, but the other one, like, he wouldn't be looking at TV and saying, "Oh, they look like me, maybe I could do that sport." Like, if disabled kids that have got more severe impairments are looking at the TV, watching the Paralympics, watching Europeans, watching whatever, and they're like, "Well, they look like me, they're in wheelchairs, but they're not like me. Like, I'm more disabled than they are."
Mhm.
What are they gonna think? They're gonna think, "Well, I can't swim." So, like, the biggest thing
Yeah.
for me is, like, if they can't see us, how can they know that they can swim? How can they know that they can do frame running, boccia, like, whatever it is, if they don't know that it actually exists and that people that are as disabled as they are actually do it? And that was, like, the biggest thing for me in Tokyo, was the first time we ever had enough low-class swimmers to do a 20-point relay. I mean, yeah, we came last in the heats, which is what we kind of expect, or was it the finals? Yeah, we came last in the finals. We made the finals, came last, but that was, we didn't care about
Yeah. The aim
medals. It
wasn't
was
to
more
win that
about,
race. Yeah.
no, it was about getting the public, and we had a really good interview after. We had Will Perry, who's a dwarf, S6,
Mhm.
myself, who's obviously S5, who's cerebral palsy and dystonia, and then we had Lyndon Longhorn and Ellie Chalice, who both had meningitis, and they're both um, Lyndon's a triple amputee, and Ellie is she's an S4. Ellie's an S3, and she's a quadruple amputee from having meningitis. And I think that was a really powerful message to show other people at home and like little kids that might be watching, or even adults or teenagers that want to get into swimming for fun. Even if you've got a severe impairment, if you want to swim, it's there for you. And I think that's a really powerful message. And it was one of my biggest frustrations that I've noticed being more disabled is that it's so much when you've got a more like a less like not as severe impairment, like you're an amputee or have very mild cerebral palsy, it's so much easier to get into sport and you don't necessarily need all the expensive equipment or you don't need as much like support or as much adaptation to fit into an able-bodied club. For someone like with
Mm.
my level of disability, you don't fit into a club. Like I'm the same speed as like 7 and 8-year-olds, because I don't have use of my legs or my upper body fully. So it's difficult and it's difficult to fit in and find where you fit and find the equipment. Like for athletics, the equipment is so expensive and kids grow out of it so quickly. But I just thought that was really important that people see us because, like that quote earlier, if you can't see us, how do you know you want to be us?
Yeah. I think you've put that really beautifully. Actually, that's actually made me quite emotional how you've worded that, and you've given such a compelling argument for it as well. And what I think was really prevalent there when you said about it is when you spoke about your team interview after the relay, it was or the medley, sorry, the medley relay. You said that you had all these people with these different disabilities as part of one team. And what you did there was you actually show that although these kids might end up feeling alone, like you said, 'cause they have this disability, and 9 times out of 10, there's probably only one disabled kid per probably 2 or 3 classes in a school.
Mm.
But you're showing that like you guys do come together, and you do have these people that are like you, and you have these friends that might not be right next to you or have the same conditions as you, which
Yeah.
is beautiful. I think I completely agree with you. I think there should be the Paralympics is a celebration of what all these incredible superhumans do. And like you said, you should be showing the extremes of that. You should be showing these people like a quadruple amputee is swimming in the elite competitions here. This is
Yeah.
incredible. Like somebody that's been told they can't move their legs, they can't move their arm, their shoulders are like you say, you're dealing with pain every day. You're bringing home medals for fun, and it's really inspirational, and it's so impressive. And I want to talk to you. So the reason I changed the name of this podcast to Refuse to Fail from Over in 80 Minutes, which is what it was, and what you've seen at this time of recording on the Instagram, which is probably why you're confused why it says Refuse to Fail up on the top. But it was the quote I have. So I've started asking people about quotes because the quote I have, and I think I may have made up, but I probably heard it somewhere, so I don't claim it as my own, is everybody wants to succeed nowadays. The want to succeed isn't enough. You have to refuse to fail. And I think your refuse to fail moment was when you got back in that pool. Would you
Yeah.
say that was your refuse to fail moment?
Yeah.
I love that. I
Yeah,
think it's
definitely.
really good. But now we're going to talk about a really happy point, or what I think would be a happy point for you. 2019. So you're now back in the pool. You've done the European champs. 2019, you became a triple world champion.
Yeah.
That is the coolest sentence I think I've ever said to anybody in my life. That is unbelievable. How was that year for you? Because at this point, are you at Loughborough?
No, not
No,
in
so you're
2019, no. So I was
so
still
you're not even a student athlete of the Loughborough program yet. You're still Manchester at this point.
yeah. So I
Wow.
was still doing my undergrad degree. I actually graduated in 2019. Still under Graham Smith.
I'm thinking about what I was doing as an undergrad, and I was not a triple world champion. That's
So
unbelievable.
that was actually quite a tricky season for me because immediately after Europeans, at the end of September, I had bilateral shoulder surgery,
Of course you did, because why make it any more difficult than it needs to be?
which was obviously like a difficult decision. But I knew that if I wanted to get to Tokyo, that was the only way I was going to get there because my shoulders weren't good. Like they needed fixing.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I fixed the joint issues. Kind of a common thing with me is you fix something and you find something else wrong. So I've still got ongoing issues with. Luckily, it's only my right shoulder now, but my tendons from like obviously all the swimming all the years, the repetitive overhead movement, swimming through injuries, the fact like the last 5 years I've been a full-time wheelchair user, and like before that I used to put all my weight onto crutches, like when I used a walker and wheelchairs. My arms never get a rest, my shoulders never get a rest. So like from all this overuse, I've got quite a lot of damage to quite a few of my like 3 out of 4 of my rotator cuff tendons, so my shoulders aren't great. But, the good thing was that having the surgery actually massively reduced the nerve pain. It almost completely got rid of it, to the point where I didn't need nerve blocks anymore because I was having nerve blocks to help me get through so that I could actually function as a human being and sit in lectures and train. But every time you have a nerve block, it damages some of that connection. So you can't actually the brain can't connect to the muscle as well. So, like, every
Right.
time you have it, you're basically getting rid of part of your muscle function, which obviously isn't great. I was having it every 3 months for a few years. So, like, every single time,
Right.
you're having a permanent impact on the function of your muscle, which obviously for someone who uses their arms all the time and needs them isn't great. So, like, having the surgery was amazing. It fixed that issue. However, I think everyone kind of underestimated how long it take me to recover. The surgeon was like, "Oh, you can get back in the water after a month and do a leg kick." And I was like, "Well, I can't kick, so,
Can't do that.
it's
Yeah.
not great." Um, I think after, like, 2 months, I was doing, like, standing up in the water, like, leaning against the wall and doing, like, arm movements, like, rehab stuff with the physio, and that was great. So at that point, I decided that I needed to move back down to the centre, which was obviously a tough decision. So that's when I started with Graham Smith again. Um That was really daunting, and obviously, like, with the PTSD and dealing with everything, that was a
Mhm.
really hard decision, but I knew that I couldn't get the support I needed because at that point, there was a physio, that I'd obviously known for many years, and he was there every single day, every single session. So you like, if you turned up and you weren't ready to swim, you could see the physio and then just come back for the evening session, just swap sessions.
Okay.
So it's kind of what I needed, and I needed like, I was doing rehab every single day with him, so it was kind of I just needed to do it, which obviously I was gutted to so I was really happy where I was, with City Manchester and MMU with gym, but it's just sometimes you've just gotta do stuff just for the better of obviously your career. Um, and I really like, it took me a long time to get back into it, like, with cerebral palsy, like, I was always told when I was younger, as soon as you stop using muscles, you're gonna lose them, and it's always taken me so much longer than anyone else to build muscle. I think that's quite typical for cerebral palsy. Um, But yeah, the fact that I couldn't move and because I had both shoulders done at once so that I could recover and be alright for Tokyo and have a full training season, like, I literally couldn't move at all for a month, like, because I need my arms to even get out of bed and, like, sit up.
Mhm.
So, I'd lost so much strength, and the nerve pain actually so the joint issue was causing nerve pain, so my dystonia was reacting, and it was actually causing a lot of tone. So I had really tight muscles, but it was from my dystonia. So as soon as you got rid of the surgery, got rid of the pain, I was then really weak because what I was using was my dystonia to move. So
Oh
like a
wow.
kind of like I don't know if anyone's seen like kids with cerebral palsy can have a surgery called SDR, selective dorsal rhizotomy, where they literally cut the sensory nerves and it gets rid of the most of the spasticity. However, you'll see that it takes them 1 to 2 years to recover because they use that spasticity, the tightness, to actually walk and move. So when you get rid of that, they have no strength underneath because there's so many muscles that they've never been able to use that didn't work. So it was kind of a similar thing that I had the surgery and I don't regret it, it was great, but I then didn't have any strength. All the strength that I was using to move and swim was gone.
Wow.
Um, so it took me about 8 months to get anywhere near as strong as I needed to be. And it's still an issue I struggle now, is being strong enough not to get injured. It's an ongoing battle, which is quite infuriating, but the surgery really made my quality of life much better, so I wouldn't change it for anything, even though it's been a struggle. So I didn't
That's
really
but that
know.
that's an interesting one because that's you weighing up Tully Kearney the person
Yeah.
against Tully Kearney the athlete, which I
Well, I
think I
think
think you made the right choice there because you're
yeah,
looking after yourself
like,
there, definitely.
pre-Rio, all I cared about was Tully Kearney, the athlete.
Yeah.
Post-Rio, like, with everything that went on, my number one priority now is me as a person. Like, I'm not willing to do anything that's gonna risk permanent damage to my body because I need my body after sport. I'm not gonna swim forever, and I've realised that swimming isn't everything. Like, I love swimming, and it's something I wanna do for a good few more years to come, but I'm not gonna do it at a detriment to my health because it's not worth it. Like, I learnt that the
Wow.
hard way. Um, and as well, like, I haven't got that much function left to lose. Like, I don't wanna be more disabled than what I am. Like, I wanna be able to function as a human being and have a 9 to 5 job and, be able to do stuff I wanna do and enjoy life as an adult. Um, so that was kind of where my mind's at now. It has really changed. Like, everything that's happened has really changed my mindset, and something that, like, I say a lot to young athletes is that it's really difficult when you've got coaches, doctors, your governing body, like you've got everyone that effectively is in charge of your funding and your payment and like your level in sport and selecting you for things, telling you to just get another steroid injection and race through and do this and do that. And it's really difficult to say no to that. And also to realize at a young age how much damage that can potentially cause. But and it's really important for athletes to actually have a say and for
Mhm.
doctors to actually realize how much damage that can cause because a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old isn't going to think, oh, I've severely damaged my hip, but I'm going to swim through it, not thinking about, oh, am I going to actually be able to walk when I'm older? Like, is this going to cause me like arthritis or chronic pain every day? Like, they're
Mhm.
not going to think that way. So I think it's really important that the governing bodies actually think about that, but also that the young athletes grow up knowing that they can say no. They don't
Yeah,
have to just agree to swim through injuries and agree to swim through. It's their body. They have to think about what's right for them, what's right for the rest of their life, not just their career, and really make an informed decision about what am I going to do? Am I going to risk it, or am I going to be sensible and give my body the rest it needs?
I agree, and I think you put that perfectly as well. That's also on the coaches as much as it is on, or coaches and
Yeah,
managers and teams organisers as much as it is the athlete. Because sometimes a coach's job is to protect an athlete from himself. Because
yeah,
an athlete will think, I need to do this. Because like you say, like funding comes into part of it. You're like, oh, I
yeah.
stop getting the money if I stop racing, but
Especially
in
like
actual sometimes there isn't. Yeah.
when you train at a performance center where your coach is the governing body coach, the GB coach, that
Mhm.
is the issue as well because they want you to win medals and keep winning medals, so they keep their jobs and we keep the funding.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's definitely a lot better than it used to be, but previously we were seen as a number and a way to keep their medals. We
Keep a
weren't
job. Yeah.
seen as Tully the human being. Whereas the new coach we have in Manchester now is amazing, and his first priority is mental health, second priority is physical health, third priority is training. And that is the way that coaches need to be. And I love the fact that they've brought him in. He's honestly the best fit, the best person they could have brought in as to replace like for a coach that we needed. And I think a lot I'm hoping like obviously him being the coach of a centre, that other coaches that have got para athletes around the country that come and train at Manchester for days to use the equipment and the services we have at the centre will actually see, oh yeah, this is the way it should be with my athletes, and is a really good role model for that
Mhm.
because it doesn't in most sports it doesn't happen. There's so many coaches that don't prioritize their athletes' well-being, and it's so important. It's the most important thing because not only the fact, obviously, their emotional, physical, social, mental well-being should be the most important thing anyway. If they're not happy and they're not healthy, they're not going to swim well anyway, are they? Or compete well in whatever sport they do.
I agree. Yeah, if you're not healthy, yeah, it's like you wouldn't let somebody swim if they broke their arm. So if somebody's not feeling right, why would you not let them? Like, why would you let them
Yeah,
swim?
I think that's the thing. Like with mental health as well, like we need to be looking at it like that, and we don't. I think it's definitely getting better, and it's way different than it was 10 years ago when I was like growing up and starting in the sport. But it's definitely something we need to work at.
I could not agree more. And yeah, I think once again, you know exactly the right words to say in the situation because you've experienced it, you've lived it, you've analyzed it, and you've seen it get better, and you see the steps it has to go to get better, like even better. So that is truly remarkable. And like, so tell me more about the difficulty of that year in 2019, because as I said, when
Yeah.
I made it sound ridiculously simple. Of you won a lot more medals and became triple world champion, but you said it was there. But how was those events at the World Championships? Because I'm going to talk about Madeira as well in
Mm.
2022, just last year, which was another ridiculous tally, which we'll get on to. But
So
yeah, like talk me through 2019, just like briefly, like just sort of bullet point 2019, where you won it, how you won it, and then the emotion that came through each one.
so I was nervous about my fitness. I'd been in the pool for 12 weeks.
Mhm.
Um, we'd gone on a training camp just before in like as like a holding camp in Italy, and I did like one stand up swim and it was terrible and I was in loads of pain. And like my coach looked at me and was like, "Oh God." But Graham had so much confidence in me that he knew what I could do better than anyone. And I now know that British Swimming actually tried to pull me from the world's team at that point, and he said no. He fought for me and was like, "No, she's fine. Like she'll do it," because
Mhm.
he knows that I'm kind of weird. I am a natural racer. Like I get behind the blocks, and it's taken me years to get to this point because I used to be terrible when I used to get too anxious and stressed, and then I would get my dystonia would flare up and I get too stiff to swim. And then my stroke would be terrible and I'd swim really slowly. But I'm just like, I can't, it's hard to explain. I get behind the block and it's like a switch flips and I'm just there, like I'm in race mode. And I have to be in a very, very bad way to not be able to race well. Like even like Tokyo, I had a really serious injury and I still swam well.
Mhm.
So it's kind for me, it's kind of a mental battle. It's like I know I'm not fully fit, especially for the long distances. It's more the mental battle of I'm in race mode, but I can't go flat out because I'll die because my fitness isn't good. So that was kind of the biggest challenge for me is like, don't go crazy, especially on the 200, because you will die and people will catch up and beat you and you probably won't finish the race. So that was kind of the biggest thing. But we kind of tried something. So after the surgery, because I couldn't swim much, I finally gave in to my mate Hannah Dines, and she'd been bugging me for years to try frame running, which is it's athletics and it's like a three-wheel frame. If you imagine a trike, so
Mhm.
one wheel at the front, two wheels at the back, quite a wide frame.
It's the one with the really long wheel at the front, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
It's
it's
on
just
like
like
an
a normal
almost
bike wheel. It's
yeah.
like a 700C bike wheels. They run off, at least the size I need because I'm quite tall. And basically, it's got a seat like a bike seat, but instead of pedals, there's nothing there, and you're leaned forward on a chest plate, so the frame's taking all your body weight, and it was made for people severe, um, too severely impaired. Basically, people with cerebral palsy that were too severely impaired to do wheelchair racing. There was a wheelchair
Okay.
racer who invented it, who was paralysed, but her friends had cerebral palsy, but they were too disabled to do wheelchair racing, so they did throwing, but they wanted to do something physically active. So she basically invented this, and it's honestly an incredible sport that I love. And it's so good to get like kids that can't walk, you put them on a frame and they can walk around the garden, like they can run, like it's just incredible. It gives them that freedom to move at their own pace and not be in an electric wheelchair all day.
Mhm.
But basically, she took me down to the track where her frame was kept, introduced me to Stockport Wheelchair Racing Club, and she let me borrow her frame for 8 months until I got mine built. And I just fell in love with it, like because I've never been good. I've never been able to use my legs for stuff. I've never been able to run, play football, stuff like that. So I was actually able to run, like, for the first time in my life at the age of,
Mhm.
what, like, 19? I was able or 19, 20, I was, like, actually able to run, which was kind of insane to me.
Wow.
Um, and I just love it, like, in the water, I'm just arms, so it was a way to use my legs. Because it's so much harder for me to move my legs, my heart rate is way higher, so I can get the cardiovascular benefits without having to do as much. And it was kind of a test of like, obviously I need to swim, but I can't swim very much. I can't do much intensity because of my shoulder. So how much can we play around with on track and how much cross training can we do? And honestly, it obviously worked perfectly because I went to Worlds really nervous, not knowing where my fitness was at because I wasn't able to swim quick and test it in the pool because my shoulder wasn't ready until literally like the days before racing. Um, so I got there and I think the 50 freestyle was first and I knew it was going to be a tight race. The sprints are always really tight races, and the heats I did a PB. I was like, okay, this is actually. But 50 is quite easy. It's not an easy event, but in terms of endurance, you don't need that much endurance to do a sprint 50. Like a lot of people when they're retired from swimming can still do a very quick 50 because
Okay.
it's
It's
realistically 30 seconds or under. If you like, it's a short race.
it's more
Um,
muscle memory and power than it is
yeah.
cardiovascular. Yeah.
Um, but I got into the final, I PB'd again, I won, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. I was like, this is like the quickest anyone had ever gone, like for years, quickest in Europe, but also the quickest anyone as an S5 had done in absolute years. Because again, the world records were very quick, but no one had touched them in some of them even 20 years. Like no one had been anywhere near them.
Mhm.
Um, I can't remember what was next. It was either the 200 or the 100, but then I won another one, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, actually, my fitness isn't too bad. Like, this is actually pretty cool. Maybe Graham was right. Like, maybe he was right that I could win all these." And then it was kind of like, "Oh God, I've got one left," and I was like, "Well, I don't want to put too much pressure on myself because I don't want to like, get too stressed and anxious and like not win. But also, how cool would it be to win all three of my races? Like, I only had 3 races. How cool would it be to win all 3 of them?" And then obviously it happened. So I think that was the biggest thing for me is like, oh, well, actually, this is probably a way forward. Cross training actually works really well. Like I haven't swum very much at all, but I've raced really well. My fitness is really good. And that's kind of like where I started to work with British Swimming. At first, they weren't really that happy and weren't convinced. And I had to buy a Garmin and wear a heart rate monitor every single session and compare it to my swim heart rate data to prove that it actually has a cardiovascular benefit because they didn't believe me. um, but now they accept it as part of my training. So
That's
it
good.
was obviously a hard thing, but no, it's become an integral part, like a really important part, especially pre-Tokyo and Madeira in 21. Um, it's yeah, it is literally the only way that I can be fit enough, and especially like in blocks like normally winter training, I train more on land, like on the track, than I do in the pool.
I love that one. Do you think so? So when that comes across to me in that brain, do you think the cross training would have been beneficial throughout, or do you think you really had to get that nailed down of the swim first? Because obviously, when you're out the pool, you're not practicing the stroke, and obviously you have
Mm.
to learn that muscle memory. So would you? Obviously, the cross training is clearly beneficial because I'm not going to argue with 3 world championships. Um, but do you think you could have had that same success doing that throughout, or do you think you needed to have that purely swimming focus and then, like, would you recommend it as a more transitional thing to bring in as you grow
I
in a
think
sport?
I think it's better for like when I was younger, I could easily cope with 20 hours a week in the pool. Like that was
Mhm.
fine. Um, I think it's more for, athletes that are older, lower classifications, like for me that struggle to
Mhm.
physically cope with the demand. And, because I think the issue when I was first classified as an S5, coaches were like, well, I know this five from Germany and she does like 17K a week and you're only doing five. And I'm like, well, yeah, but she's got a spine injury. It's different.
Yeah.
Like the part of her body that does works normally, like she can recover quicker. So it was kind of like trying to not be compared to other people that can be obviously everyone's different, but
Mhm.
especially for me and I think the years I think the reason it works is because I've got muscle memories from all the years like I started training when I was 8.
Yeah.
Um, and I started ramping up the volume when I was 13. So I had like a good 5, 6 year block of a crazy amount of meters. And I think that's given me a good baseline because I can get fit really quickly. Um, so I think if someone was coming into sport and trying to cross train, I don't know how effective it would be. But if someone like look at Adam Peaty, like with his broken ankle, broken foot,
Yeah.
like it's proved like lockdown. If you look at the athletes that actually did training during lockdown, that did running, cycling, whatever, like got pools in the back garden, they competed way better at the Olympics, Paralympics than the athletes that did nothing. Like it does have an effect. It definitely has an effect. And it made our transition when we're allowed back into training much smoother and easier. So I think like if there's a time where you can't swim, you've got an injury, you decide to have surgery, you've broken your foot, or like me, you've got dodgy shoulders because you've trained all these years and you're trying to protect your shoulders, or like sometimes swimmers can be like backs, knees, necks. If you've got an injury or like something that's prone to injury, I think it's a really good thing to look into cross training, and especially if your sport is causing you pain, like there's got to be another way around it. That's kind of for me, like there's always another way, and frame running for me has been that other way. And obviously, cross training is not going to work for everyone, but if you've got an athlete that can't physically put in the hours that's needed to be as fit as they need to be, then why not look at something else?
Mhm. I, Once again, the proof's in the pudding. You've smashed it. You're doing that, and now we're going to talk to we're going to talk about what I consider to be the haha I told you so moment for you, which is everything sort of come together. We've had such adversity, you've had initial success that you've had to work on, you've been rewarded with that. Then, like I said, we had 2016, which was a horrible year for anybody to go through. Then you've had London, European Championships. We get to Madeira, and I'm just going to read this out for the listeners here. So you were competing at Madeira. This is another World Champs. You've We're doing 3 individual events and 1 mixed event. Your worst finish in the whole thing was second. That was your worst finish in all of the races you did that weekend or that week. How you broke 3 world records, and one of them, like you said, was 22 years old. So that is ludicrous. How how does it feel when I read that back to you?
Crazy, like unbelievable.
Do you know how I know that you mean that? Because you have answered everything with so much detail in it, and it's crazy. There's only one word for it.
I think
How
it's like it's unheard of. You don't really hear of an athlete going to a major champs and breaking a world record in all 3 of their individual races.
you don't hear people going, and you very rarely hear people doing it in 1. Never mind 3.
Yeah.
So how was that that collection of days for you, and then does it feel? How did it feel breaking the first world record,
Hmm.
and then how did it feel when you broke the third one after you'd
It was
done
kind of
something?
it was a weird meet for me because after Tokyo, with the restructure of British swimming, my coach Graham Smith was made redundant, and I relied on him. Like I said earlier, he knew what to say to me. I relied on that too much, and it was
Mhm.
really difficult. So that was like my first international not having him there, and I kind of didn't really know what to do with myself. Like I was really struggling, and I kind of felt like no one had my back. Like I really had to fight for myself. Because originally I was supposed to do more relays, and then because of my shoulder injury, they withdrew me because again I had another injury. Unfortunately, like that season, I swam really well at the German Open in Berlin, and that was my first time. And like since I first raced there 11 years before that, I went back, and so that was like an incredible experience. Swam really well, broke a world record in the 53, and that was my first time in years racing without a physio support, like without actually a
Mhm.
physio or soft tissue therapist being there. So that was like a really big achievement for me. Unfortunately, getting back, we didn't have consistent coaches. Like when my coach was made redundant, we had 3 coaches rotating to trainers, so there was a lack of communication, and I wasn't rested after racing, which for me is a massive thing to protect my shoulder.
Mhm.
So I ended up with quite a bad injury, and had to swim through it because again, every day, like every other day or every day, sometimes it was a different coach. So there wasn't that communication. There wasn't the consistency of them seeing how much I was struggling. Um, and because of the injury, I was left behind from a training camp. So we were supposed to go on a training camp for 2 weeks to Lanzarote, and I'd already in February, because I didn't go to trials, I'd already spent a week at Loughborough Uni to try and I was
Mhm.
scoping it out for next season for what like this was supposed to be the September just gone. And so the head coach was like, "Why didn't you just go to Loughborough for 2 weeks?" And I was like, "You know what? Okay." Like I got on really well with the coach there. One of the athletes there, James Hollis, like I met him in like 2011, so I knew him really well. And I was like, "You know what? Yeah, I'll just go back to Loughborough. You know, it's fine. Go for 2 weeks." And then
Not
I
quite
suddenly
Lanzarote, but
realised,
it's still.
yeah, like obviously this injury was pretty bad. I had a steroid injection, had to wait a week for it to settle
Mhm.
before I could actually swim. Um, and this coach was he just reminds me so much of Graham. Like Gareth was amazing, the Loughborough coach at the time. Like
Mhm.
just got me. Like hadn't worked with that many para athletes before. Had one S5 summer that he coached towards Tokyo. And that was kind of obviously James, a higher classification athlete, but not really had that much experience. But he was willing to learn, willing to listen, and he actually let me have control and say over my training, which is what I was used to. And obviously, someone at my level, I know what works and what doesn't. Obviously, I want a coach's input and I need a coach's input, but I also like to have my own input into my training, and I wasn't getting that.
Mhm.
Um, and that's a big thing for me. And basically, after the 2 weeks, I realised I was so much calmer. I had way more energy because of the PTSD, and that's kind of what made me realise how much I still struggle in Manchester. And if I'm in a different environment, my life is easier. Like I just feel better. Like I can sleep better. Like it's just kind of crazy. Um, and I just got on so well that I was like, you know what? I'm not going back. So I just like, I was really nervous. Had a Zoom call and was like, I don't want to come back to Manchester. So the plan originally was for me to go back to Manchester, and then after Worlds, I was supposed to spend a month in Loughborough as a trial, and then if I like it, move in September. But I ended up staying there for 12 weeks instead. Um,
If it's the better fit for you, it makes sense to stay there.
yeah. So obviously, like going into Worlds, um, I Gareth was really good. I bugged him, like I messaged him and phoned him a lot while I was there, just for a bit of like moral support. But it was my first time since 2015 not having my coach at the meet. And like when you're a centre athlete, your coach is at every single camp or competition you go to. So suddenly not having them there is really, really difficult. So that was kind of my biggest thing is like, oh, I've got no one here. Like I feel alone. And obviously I wasn't. Like the other British members of
Mhm.
staff were there. Like Gareth was there on the other end of the phone. But I was just really nervous, and I knew my fitness was really good because I'd done so much track work, um, and I'd been working really well with a group in like being in Loughborough. Like there's a group in Coventry wheelchair racers, so I was training with them, and like I knew my fitness was as good as it had been in like probably better than it had ever been to be honest. Like at least for the last 6 7 years. So I knew going in I had good chance of swimming well. For me it was more I had to control emotions, like, I had to try and figure out how to cope without having that one person, without having Graham there, getting me in the right headspace. So, that was difficult, and also knowing that I needed to protect my shoulder. My shoulder wasn't in a great space, and it was my first time of having to swim heat smart, like purposely swimming slower in the heats and not caring if you get lane 4. So obviously, like the quicker,
Mhm.
because it's spearheaded, the quickest goes in lane 4. But like the biggest thing that was drilled into me, you don't need to be in lane 4. You only need to be like within the top 4 lanes. If you're in the end
Yeah.
lane, it's a bit harder. If you're in the top 4 lanes, it doesn't matter. So it was purposely swimming slowly in the heats to save my shoulder, because swimming slower doesn't hurt my shoulder that much.
Mhm.
And then by the time I get into the final, being all right, because that was kind of the issue in Tokyo, was I went flat out in the heats and I was in so much pain that it wouldn't settle between heats and finals. And then because I was racing day 1, day 2, I was just in pain constantly the whole time. It didn't settle. So swimming slow heats and fast finals actually work really well. But it's so difficult when you've got, like for me, being a natural racer, it's so
Yeah.
difficult to
You got people in
control and
front
go
of you.
slow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like letting people pass you and letting people turn quicker than you, and it's just, oh, I hate it. I hate it so much. Which I think is a good trait to have.
So
But
are
that
you like
was
talking to
really
yourself in the
fun.
pool for like these small sections? Are you like, it's
Yeah,
fine, it's fine, it's fine.
and like I don't swim down because I
Yeah.
can't, with warm up racing, and then you've got the finals as well. It's too many meters for my shoulder to cope with, especially when I've got to race multiple days in a row over a 10-day
Mhm.
meet. So I can't swim down. So then we tried something else. So the new thing was having a really, really like scalding hot shower for 15 minutes and then having soft tissue to get rid of any of the remaining lactics as like a flush. And that actually worked really well. So like it was kind of weird. It was kind of trying different things and working with different people, and but so again, like it was a good learning experience for me. Like even at this age, I'm still learning, even at my
Mhm.
experience. But yeah, I was so happy, and like that was really the eye opener to me, that if I'm happy, look at how much quicker I can swim. And that's kind of when I knew that Loughborough was the right fit, and that at some point I need to make a decision to actually move.
Wow. I mean, I think this has been arguably. I've been very lucky, so I'm not contracted or anything, so I get to pick and choose who I speak to. I get to pick and choose how long I take between episodes to bring them out. This has been arguably one of the most inspirational, informative. I think just all round, like it's dumbfounding to me, all these things that go on. Like you're talking about, you're having these PTSD, you're talking about these mental blocks that you're having, as well as the physical disabilities that people see and don't see, and people acknowledge but they don't really understand. And when it all came to this head at Madeira, and you got these world records, you got these golds, you got everything, it must just be so rewarding. And obviously you're not finished yet, like you said, your goal is still to be Paralympic athlete.
I think like for me, every time like winning the gold in Tokyo was kind of like, for me, it was like, well, this is a great way to say thank you to everyone that's helped me along the journey.
Mhm.
And then again, like breaking 3 world records in Madeira, what better way is it to thank Loughborough Uni for taking me in and working with me for 12 weeks than breaking 3 world records? And for me, unfortunately, Gareth moved on and he's now a lecturer. Like, honestly, he was such a good coach. I was absolutely gutted. But the fact that my last race, like with him, well, I raced in British Summer Championships and I did break world records there. I went even quicker. However, there weren't any drug testers there, so they're counted as European records, but they're not counted as world records. Um, but obviously I broke them at Worlds, but I
Gives
think
you a chance to break them again.
yes,
That's the way I look
exactly.
at
But
it. Break them
I
in
think it's
Paris.
really nice
Get
for
the
me
cameras.
that it was kind of like, I mean, Gareth doesn't care about his career. He doesn't care about like himself looking good. All he cares about is his athletes, which is obviously what a good coach does. But like what a great thing for him to have. Like the main thing I thought
Yeah.
about was, oh, this is amazing for Gareth because he's got this. He's going to have this on like his CV if he ever tries to work at a swimming club again. Like,
I love that.
uh,
I love that that's your thought going out of that. I think that says a lot about you as a person as well, and it says a lot about the bond you've grown with Gareth over the years. Because I think another thing that's prevalent throughout this whole conversation we've had, like we've been talking for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it's shown like you've been thankful for Gareth at every stage he's been in your journey. And like you said, like he's now might be a lecturer, but I imagine you'll still get a few phone calls every now and again when you're just needing a
yeah,
word of advice.
yeah. Well, like the other week, I raced like just before Christmas. I raced at Corby in their long course meet, and
Mhm.
I want to try and do the backstroke because I want more medal opportunities and more races. Because I used to like the 100 free. It used to be my fun event. I was always terrible at sprints. I was a 400 freestyle and 200 medley swimmer basically, and 100 fly eventually. um, But I was always terrible at the 100 free, and the 100 free was the event I always entered. I never medalled. I sometimes didn't even final, but it was a fun event. and I miss having that fun event. So I was like, "Oh, I'll try and get back into backstroke again," because I was doing it in 2018, but with the shoulder surgery and everything, we like to protect my shoulder, we were just focused on freestyle, and then I hadn't swum it in so many years, I didn't have a time, so I couldn't race it, in, like, major meets because I don't have a time in the rankings because I haven't raced it since mid-2018. So I raced it, hoping like I kind of had in mind what time I wanted to go, like, I wanted to go under a minute, um, and preferably, like, I wanted to go, like, around 50 seconds. I was like, "I'm pretty sure I can go between, like, 48 and 52 seconds." And try and build up to get closer to like 46, 45-ish by Paris. Have it as a potential bronze medal event. Try and see if I can push for another medal. Not expecting a silver or a gold, but if I could get a bronze, that's another medal. Like, how cool is that? And I raced it. I went 42 seconds, and I'm now ranked number 2 in the world by a good second from me in the third. And number 1 was zero point 0.6 of a second ahead of me, and she's actually a Turkish swimmer who I'm really good friends with. But one good thing is she was actually so nice to me, and she sent me a message congratulating me, which obviously doesn't always happen when you like start beating your friends. Um, she doesn't usually swim freestyle because she's an arm amputee, so she's just legs. We're pretty much the opposite of each other. But arm amputees, where they're just legs, don't really usually do sprint events because they've got a more advantage over the long distances with the turns and the kick off the balls, like the
Yeah.
underwater phase. Um, but she is a backstroker, so she doesn't really do freestyle, so I don't get to race against her much. I'm like, "Oh, I get to race against her now." But I'm like, "Oh no, she's gonna hate me," but actually she's so nice. But it's just kinda I messaged Gareth, like, I just sent him a screenshot of that and a screenshot of the world rankings and put, "Oops, this was supposed to be a fun event."
I wish I could do things and get to second in the world and respond with oops. But that is the perfect place to end the main body of this podcast because it sounds like I'm going to get an excuse to bring you back on in a year or two's time and discuss it all again. Because, like I said, I've had the most fun, Tully. This has been, like I said, truly inspirational, eye-opening, whatever you want to call it. It's 9, almost 7:30 on a Sunday night, and I'm ready to just go and run through a brick wall because you have inspired me endlessly. So there's only two segments, let's call them segments, left to get through before I can let you enjoy your Sunday evening. The first one is one you looked a bit worried when I told you that we were first going to do this. This is called Under the Team Bus. Very similar to Quick Fire all those minutes ago, except this time, instead of saying what your answer is, you pick the person in the teams that you've had over the years who most fits this description.
Okay.
So, nice, easy one to start. Who's the most determined? Who has like wire focus? Like they could be 3 lengths behind somebody and still think, I'm going to win this race.
So Andy Mullen, he's a retired swimmer now, but he's actually when I was struggling, he's the one that helped me focus and realize how to get into race mode because I'd never seen anyone like him before. Like it doesn't matter what's going on, his race mode is just insane.
Click the
Yeah.
switch and he's. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Who's the biggest practical joker?
Tom Hamer. He's sometimes it goes so far that it's infuriating, but he's generally pretty funny.
Who's the most naturally gifted swimmer you've ever had in the group? Like who just cuts through water like a knife?
You know what? We've got a new swimmer, Poppy Maskell on S14. She's incredible, like absolutely incredible, and she's still really young. And I don't know exactly how old she is. She's under 18 still at school. She started training as a Manchester, and she's already beaten the old girls. Like already starting
dear.
to get up there. She's going to be absolutely rapid, like one to watch in a few years.
Like Katie Ledecky standards have just
Yeah.
cleared
Oh
cleansed
yeah.
house.
She's incredible.
Love that. I love that so much. Who's the most clumsy? Who just always forgets things or drops their phone or
Leah O'Connell. Oh my god, she is like there was one that we have these tiny little polar heart rate monitor sensors that are like the size of like slightly smaller than 10p, and she dropped it down like sometimes pools where the water goes over the
the
edge. She was like,
drains?
"Right." She dropped it down the drain. Like that was great, and it was never to be seen again.
Oh dear. Who is most up for a night out? I imagine not a lot of you because you're all extreme athletes, but
I have to say Andy again. Andy would party all night, go home, get changed, and like not even sleep, and just go straight to training, and then sleep after.
my goal. It's not Michael Jordan meant that. Who has the best fashion sense? Who turns up with some pretty cool gear?
To be honest, most of us just turned up in sloppy clothes like gym kit or We don't really bother. We don't really pay that much. Like one
Okay.
actually, uh, Zach Washington Young. It's still like tracksuits, but he always comes in like fancy matching tracksuits. So I'd probably say him.
Bit more coordination.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this might make my next question. Who's got the worst fashion sense? Because you can just answer all of you if you all just chuck on whatever's first on the top of the pile.
Probably, especially in the mornings, it'd be all of us because we just chuck on joggers or like use gym kit.
In fairness, if somebody tells me to be at the pool for 5 a.m., I'm not really worried about what I'm wearing. Who's the most gullible? Like, who just believes anything you tell them?
This is a tie between Leah O'Connell and Ellie Chalice.
Poor Leah O'Connell's getting sold a dream. She's that means we'll have to get her on so she can tell us all the embarrassing things you didn't talk about yourself. Who is the best dancer? Who just looks most comfortable on the dance floor?
I don't think I've seen any of them dance.
None. No. Oh, they all. You didn't go to the club in Glasgow, so that'll be why.
No.
No. Okay. Well, Miss, I was going to ask you who the worst dancer is. Then, if you have an
Although
answer,
actually, it'd probably be Ellie Simmons or like, and so obviously she did Strictly, but
yeah.
Ellie they used to do all these little like dance videos with Claire Cashmore and Charlotte Henshaw, which they both moved on to different sports. But they used to do loads of little dance videos like years ago.
Like TikToks.
Yeah.
TikToks before Ellie Simmons was TikTok before TikTok was famous.
I don't know what it was called. It was basically like TikTok, but it was before TikTok existed. I don't know what it was, but it was like literally like a TikTok.
I love that. Oh, like Vine or whatever it was called.
Yeah, it was probably Vine.
God, that makes me feel old saying Vine or whatever it was. I remember that coming out. Who is the future coach? Like, who just like they love to help and share wisdom, and
Ooh.
you're always free to say yourself if you do have that one thing where you think I would
No,
really like.
that's the one thing. Like, I actually, I'm now an assistant coach for athletics, but I can't think of anything worse of spending more time of my life at a poolside. Like, I've spent so much time at a poolside. I don't want to be a coach. No thanks. I don't know really. There's not really anyone at the minute. I think 'cause we're also focused on our careers. There's not really anyone that I know of at the minute that's actually that much focused on coaching.
Fair play. That's one for the future. Focus on the here and now.
Mm.
Okay, I was gonna. That one's. I will miss that one out. That one's a bit more. No, yeah, we can. Who's hard as nails? Who just looks like they'd win in a fight if they ever got in one?
Probably say Reece Dunn.
Yeah, you answered that quickly enough.
He's pretty tall, like big lad.
No,
Like
no,
very
he's-
muscly. Yeah.
Anybody that's 6'3", I'm not fighting. We're all right. Who had a bad lockdown haircut? Like who came back and their mum had clearly tried to help them with the shears or something?
Yeah, it's hard to tell really, like because of Zoom.
They're all
Uh,
wearing caps, so you can't really tell.
yeah. I'd probably say Ollie Hine. It's probably like he started training as a Manchester a bit, and his hair. He just let his hair grow so long it was just a bit much.
Did he go for the mullet? Did he not, or did he just? Oh,
It was long. Yeah.
lockdown mullets were definitely the thing. Who is the biggest natural athlete you had? Like in the pool, like somebody that's just they're just like an engine. Like you're doing conditioning and they just don't stop.
Bethany Firth.
Really, she just goes for hours.
Yeah.
I'm jealous. Pure jealous.
Never like. There's some athletes that just really moan and will like fake their goals breaking so they can like take a break and stuff. She's never done that. Just straight on it. Does exactly what needs to be done.
I'm still jealous of her aptitude. Who has the best tunes? Like when you're on the team bus going to the meet, who's playing the tunes?
So it was. It's probably not really now. Now there's a lot of questionable tunes, but it was Ollie before he retired. Ollie Hind had the best tunes, but it was a lot of Bieber, so it was sometimes questionable. But now it's like people like to play like heavy metal and country, and I'm just like, no.
I get on board with country. I don't know if I need heavy
But not
metal
when
on
you're
a
in
team
the
bus.
gym.
Yeah, country in the
Not really
gym.
gym music.
Oh, Tully, I'll send you about 6 songs that'll change your mind. Like Luke Combs, "Cold Beer Never Broke My Heart." That will get you there. Like that's like especially like if you're ever going through a breakup, you play that song. You're like as like what is it? People say like oh you're in like hot girl era or whatever it's called. That's what you are by the end of it.
Okay.
That's how it goes. That's my advice to you. Luke Combs, "Cold Beer Never Broke My Heart." Last one. Who hogs the mirror the most after the meet? Like who knows they've got their big BBC interview coming up and they're taking like making sure every hair is okay in the mirror, making sure.
There's
Who, sorry?
definitely a few. There's a few of them.
Okay.
I don't think Tom's as bad. Tom used to be really bad. Tom Hamer is not as bad. Zach Washington Young, Ellie Chalice, Jess Applegate. Honestly, there's loads. Like pretty much all the girls, like half the girls on the team, and a few of the lads.
Fair play. That is the end of Under the Team Bus. You've absolutely smashed it. You gave some great answers there. Now, before I let you get on your way, the final segment is all we have to get through now. But this one's nice and easy. I gave you time for this one before you came on. You've just won, I don't know at this point, your 800th gold medal, your 900th gold medal. You've broken your own world record for the 400th time, and you did this with blindfolds on just for a bit of a challenge. But you've now going to celebrate. You have to pick 3 songs to get the rest of the team ready for the night out and feeling groovy. What 3 songs are you picking and why?
Well, to be honest, I wouldn't care as much about the rest of the team. It'd be more like what I want to like after, like like celebration songs.
Yeah, well, quite right. That's how it should be.
So one is I'm obsessed with McFly and Busted, but I
Right.
like a celebration song is This Is Like Happiness. Happiness is like one of their newer songs, and that's like I think that's just has to be. Another one is Reach for the Stars.
By S Club.
S Club.
Great.
Me and my friends. So my friend who used to be a swimmer, she was a learning disabled swimmer in S14, went into athletics, but she developed dystonia. So
Okay.
she actually has both shoulders fused. So both of us used to sing and dance to this, and neither of us can reach above shoulder height. So we used to do a little dance and be like, reach, because like we can't reach above our head. And like it was just kind of hilarious. So it's just like that's always my go-to like celebration song now, because it's just we envision like all of our sisters say like they and like our friends say they can't listen to that song without just bursting out laughing because of our little dance because they can't reach above their head. So that has to be like a celebration song.
I love that. So we've got Happiness by Busted / McFly, Reach for the Stars by S Club.
And I'd probably go High Hopes.
From Panic at the Disco.
Yeah.
Great song. Love that song. There you
You're
go.
kind of like happy positivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I'd be ready for a night out after that. You smashed it, especially S Club.
Yeah.
You smashed it. Right. Before we get on your way, Tully, where can my wonderful, lovely listeners follow you to keep up with your story as it unfolds?
So either on Twitter or Instagram. Instagram is at Tully_Kearney and Twitter is just at Tully Kearney.
Amazing. And all those links will be in the description of this YouTube video, of this audio platform, Spotify, Apple, you name it. Now all that we need to do is you lovely listeners, share it, tell your friends. This is a brand new rebrand, so I need to get myself out there, get people to recognize the name. Allows me to get brilliant guests on, like Tully here. I've had the most wonderful time. Like I said, share, tell your mum, tell your dog, tell your dad, tell your brother, tell anybody. So somebody you walk past in the street go, I heard a great podcast with Tully Kearney, MBE last night. You should listen to it too. Thank you guys so much. This is going to be another series, 10 episodes weekly, starting from today, 10 weeks. Wonderful variety of guests, everyone. I gave you the sneak peek that Gregor Swinney's going to be on here soon, so you're going to have to listen out for that if you want to hear about how the butterfly should be done without somebody that fuses both their shoulders and decides they're still going to try it. I am so thankful for you all, Tully Kearney, MBE. This has been truly inspirational. Thank you guys so much for listening. Goodbye.